Hi everyone. Tonight, we gently step into the quiet drift of a world without central heating, without space heaters, and without even the steady comfort of a fireplace. You find yourself at the edge of a frozen frontier. Snow is already circling your boots, and the first breath you take feels sharp, almost cutting. The wind presses against your coat, as if questioning whether you are truly ready to follow the early American settlers who walked straight into storms that seemed intent on stripping warmth from their bodies. You imagine leaving modern comfort behind and entering their unforgiving winter. One clear reality becomes obvious immediately. You likely would not survive this if you relied only on what you are used to today. So before settling in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you honestly enjoy this content. As you get comfortable, share your location and local time in the comments. Now lower the lights. Allow the cold to gather at the edges of your thoughts, and focus on your breathing as it pulls you deeper into the story. You take your first steps forward, hearing the hard crunch of snow beneath your feet. This is not a gentle fall. The snow drives sideways, striking your face like fine grit. You pull your collar higher, feeling the fabric stiffen in the cold. The storm is no longer just around you, it is actively testing you. You begin to understand why settlers described nights like this as battles, even without weapons. The cold itself behaved like a tireless opponent. You continue along the frontier path. Trees bow under layers of ice. Your fingers start to ache, and without thinking, you push them deeper into your gloves. Ahead, you picture a small settlement, little more than a few rough cabins. None appear capable of standing up to a storm like this. In truth, it seems clear that no one arriving in the early years was fully prepared for winters sweeping in from the continent's interior. A well-documented historical fact comes to mind as you move forward. Early frontier winters often dropped far below freezing for extended periods, sometimes without warning. Settlers wrote about nights when temperatures fell so sharply that water froze solid inside their homes. You realize you are stepping into a place where the cold set the rules, defining survival before anyone could debate it. A strong gust cuts across your path, forcing you to squint. You notice the metallic sting of the cold, how it dries your nose and burns your throat. Beneath the snowdrifts, branches rub together with a muted hush. To your left, you notice a crude cabin. Its door barely clings to its hinges. You imagine settlers rushing inside, brushing off snow, already bracing themselves for a long night without a reliable fire. Before moving closer, a small detail surfaces from old letters and journals. Some settlers believed that spreading a thin layer of goose grease on their cheeks helped prevent frostbite during severe storms. You picture the shine on your own skin and can't help but smile at the practical oddness of it. History is filled with solutions that sound strange, until the cold becomes intense enough to make them sensible. The storm thickens. Your boots sink deeper into the snow. You reach the cabin and slide a gloved hand along the rough logs. The cold has begun to twist the wood. A crack splits one corner, wide enough to fit a knife blade. You wonder how anyone slept here while the night roared outside. Historians still debate whether early frontier communities underestimated winter or simply had no way to grasp its severity until the first blizzard trapped them in place. You pause, leaning your head against the frozen wall. Was it ignorance or sheer necessity that drove them into landscapes that drained heat so completely? You take a slow breath, watching it cloud the air, and push the door open. The hinges groan. Inside, the cabin is dim, lit only by pale gray light slipping through gaps between the logs. The dirt floor is frozen hard, almost like rock. Cold gathers instantly around your ankles. You step inside and shut the door. A thin line of snow still sneaks through a crack near the threshold, sliding across the floor as if alive. Your shoulders loosen only slightly as you scan the small space. There is no fireplace, not even a proper pit, just a shallow hollow where someone once tried to make a fire. Now there is only ash and a few stubborn flecks of charcoal. You kneel and touch the edge, feeling how completely cold it is. Any warmth disappeared long ago. You think, imagine sleeping here. You picture curling up on the floor, wrapped in whatever layers you have, listening as the wind slams against the walls. You imagine settlers enduring this for weeks, sometimes months, until they could find time or materials to build a real hearth. You breathe out slowly, letting the weight of the cold sink deeper into your thoughts. A small window opening, barely the size of your hand, sits in the far wall. You walk over and trace a circle in the frost lining the inside. When you look out, the world appears white and shaking, the storm pulling every loose thing into frantic motion. You imagine footprints disappearing almost as soon as they are made. You picture a mother holding her children in the darkness, calming them with quiet words that nearly freeze as they leave her mouth. You shift your stance and run your fingers along the wall. Cold air slips through tiny gaps, each one a reminder that the cabin is losing its struggle. You think about how early pioneers had to work constantly, not just to build shelter, but to keep it from falling apart in weather like this. You close your eyes and listen. The wind hums along the seams. Low and steady. Snow whispers against the logs. Beneath it all, you sense the same steady resolve the settlers must have carried, the need to continue despite the cold pressing from every direction. Your breathing slows. Your shoulders ease. The storm remains, but the fear it sparked at the beginning softens into understanding. Before the next stage of this journey begins, you stay within this fragile shelter, aware that the storm outside is only the first challenge. You remain in the dim shell of the cabin a moment longer, letting the air settle. The wind still scrapes the walls, and the structure trembles slightly, as if being tested. When you finally open the door again, a thin sheet of snow slides across the floor at your feet. You step back into the blizzard, lifting the collar of your coat higher, aware that the settlers who raised these first cabins likely never paused to admire what they built. They worked while shivering, while worrying, while racing against storms that ignored all plans. You push through the deepening snow toward another cabin farther up the slope. This one is barely more than a skeleton. The walls reach only to your waist. Logs are stacked unevenly, some still without proper notches. The roof is unfinished, a rough mix of bark, branches, and crude shingles that seem ready to tear away with a strong wind. You tilt your head and notice pieces of bark fluttering at the edge, almost like a silent plea. You step inside through an opening that was meant to be a door but has none. The interior is open to the elements, and snow sweeps straight through in a slanted stream. It is easy to see how the settlers tried to make progress before the storm overtook them. A few chisels sit on a stump. A hatchet lies where it was dropped, its blade half buried in ice. Whoever worked here left quickly, perhaps at the first low rumble of thunder signaling the storm's approach. You imagine yourself standing where they stood. You picture the sky darkening too fast, the temperature falling without warning. You feel the sudden tightness in your chest when it becomes clear the cabin will not be finished in time. You imagine grabbing tools, brushing snow from your sleeves, and running towards stronger shelter. Maybe you carry a child under one arm. Maybe you clutch the last bundle of blankets pulled from the wagon. Either way, you know this unfinished structure cannot keep you alive through the night. A well-known historical reality becomes clear as you stand in the exposed room. Early American settlers often reached their land late in the year because travel alone took months. Rivers flooded, wagons failed, and roads dissolved into mud. By the time families arrived, autumn was already closing in. Many simply lacked the time to build the solid homes they intended. You feel that truth in the frozen air brushing your face. Winter did not pause for unfinished walls. You crouch and drag your fingers across the half-frozen dirt floor. The cold bites instantly and you pull your hand back. It is clear no one could sleep here, even wrapped in every blanket they owned. Your breath forms thick clouds in front of you. You look at the gaps between the logs. Each opening invites the wind inside. Each one shows how rushed the work was. As you study the cabin, a small memory comes to mind, drawn from a traveler's journal. Some settlers believed that singing while building helped fight the cold. They thought the vibrations warmed the chest and arms just enough to keep their hands moving. You picture it now, unsteady voices rising against the wind, axes swinging, tired men convincing themselves that a song could slow the cold. Maybe it helped. Maybe the rhythm simply kept them working a little longer. You stand and move toward the open edge of the roof. Snow gathers on your eyelashes as you squint upward. The structure feels delicate, more an idea than protection. Still, someone trusted their winter to this fragile plan. You can sense urgency in every notch cut into the logs. Each mark seems to say hurry. Each splinter whispers hope. Historians still debate whether settlers underestimated the time needed to build proper homes or whether the harsh conditions defeated even skilled woodsmen. As you run a hand along a log, the answer feels mixed. Determination met reality, and winter usually decided the result. You step back outside and let the storm surround you again. Snow stings your cheeks. You tuck your chin into your coat and head toward the next structure in the clearing. The wind howls through the trees, shaking ice loose from the branches. Each breath feels colder than the last. Your boots sink into deep drifts as the ground rises and dips beneath swirling snow that settles like scattered flour. In the distance, another roof shape emerges from the white haze. You follow it, intent on understanding what settlers endured on nights like this. When you reach the second cabin, it is in slightly better condition. The walls reach your shoulders. Most of the roof is in place, though small gaps along the edges let thin streams of snow slip inside. You push gently on the door. It shifts but holds. You push harder until it creaks open just enough to squeeze through. Inside, the air is calmer. The wind is still audible, but it no longer hits you directly. The floor is bare but smoother than the last. A few planks rest near a corner, ready to be nailed down. Someone measured these carefully. Someone planned for comfort that never fully arrived. Your shoulders relax a little. Even an unfinished cabin like this would have felt like a gift during a storm. Yet as you look around, you sense the fear that must have filled this space on winter nights. The cold presses in from all sides. The air feels sharp. You imagine a family sitting here, pressed close together, quietly assuring one another that the roof would hold, that the walls would block the wind, that morning would come. You place a hand against the far wall and feel the cold radiating through it. Even through your gloves, your fingers begin to numb. You let your arm fall and take a slow breath, picturing settlers trying to sleep in this half-built room. No fire, no chimney, no insulation, only resolve and whatever warmth they could find. You remain there, listening to the muffled roar outside. The wind scrapes along the boards. Snow slips through tiny gaps, landing on the floor like faint sparks. You understand that this was daily life for many who came west seeking a new beginning. Winter showed no concern for hopes. It arrived early and lingered. As your breathing slows, the storm fades slightly at the edges of your awareness. The cold remains, but the unfinished walls feel like the start of a longer story, and you know the journey into harsher winter has only begun. You leave the cabin and step back into the open white rush of the storm. The wind coils around your neck like icy hands, and you hunch forward as you push through the rising drifts. Snow now reaches nearly to your waist, soft in places and hard like glass in others. Each step sinks and resists. You begin to understand why settlers described blizzards as living forces, unpredictable and relentless. The path ahead feels less like a trail and more like a careful bargain with nature. Ahead, the shape of another cabin comes into view, a low, dark outline, partly swallowed by snow. You walk toward it, listening to the sharp crunch beneath your boots and the wind slipping through the trees with a hiss like distant steam. When you reach the door, you see it is not stuck or frozen. Instead, it is sealed behind a solid wall of snow that rises almost to the roofline. The drifts cling to the structure like an added layer of protection, dense and unmoved. You slide your gloved hand across the packed surface. It feels smooth and unexpectedly warmer than the surrounding air. For a moment, your breathing tightens as you consider how frightening this barrier would have been for any family inside. If the doorway vanished completely under a deep drift, someone could lie awake all night wondering whether they would dig free before the air thinned or the roof collapsed under the weight. You begin clearing a small section with your hands, scraping away until the wooden frame shows beneath the hardened crust. When you press against the door, it creaks open just enough for you to slip through. Inside, the space is dim and calmer than the storm beyond the walls, though the cabin shudders now and then when a strong gust strikes the roof. You step carefully. Snow has spilled across the floor in a pale ridge, and the boards beneath it creak sharply. A narrow beam of winter light slips through a knot hole in the wall, flickering across the snow like a trembling line. You picture a family once living here, jolted awake as snow stacked against the door until the cabin felt sealed off from the world. You pull the door closed and scan the room more closely. A few clay pots lie overturned, as if brushed aside in haste. In one corner, a straw-filled mattress sits flattened from years of use. A simple wooden stool rests on its side. Everything suggests hurried movement, driven by the weather. The cabin feels like a frozen moment of anxiety preserved in wood and shadow. You kneel near the window opening. The shutters are shut, but heavy snow presses against them, forcing the slats inward. You place your fingers on the panel. The wood hums faintly under the weight outside. You imagine lying here during a storm night, listening to the dull thuds of snow piling higher, wondering if morning would bring freedom or confinement. A detail from frontier journals crosses your mind. Many accounts mention doors freezing shut during blizzards, forcing families to climb out through roof hatches or carve small air holes in desperation. You envision the tense pause before someone lifts an axe and strikes the wall with its blunt end. As you inhale, you almost sense a trace of old pine smoke mixed with lingering fear. While examining the room, a memory from a traveling naturalist surfaces. He once described snowdrifts as accidental insulation, a fact settlers soon noticed themselves. When snow packed tightly against cabin walls, it reduced how easily wind slipped through the cracks. It was unplanned, a winter coincidence, but the benefit was real. You run your hand along the drift near the door and feel that truth firsthand. The snow is cold, but it blocks the wind's sharp edge. You pause, letting your thoughts wander. A fragment of oral folklore comes to mind. Some families believed winter spirits piled snow against the homes of those meant to survive. It was partly superstition, partly reassurance, shared quietly as adults tried to calm frightened children. You imagine a mother bending close to her drowsy daughter, explaining that the snow outside is a protector, not a danger. Then a more measured thought settles in. Researchers who study early settlement life still debate how common these snowbound nights were. Some believe they occurred only during the most violent storms. Others argue they were regular features of frontier winters, so routine that families eventually stopped recording them. You consider both views while standing in the half-dark room, listening to the storm press against the roof like a heavy cover. Moving slowly across the cabin, you trail your fingers along the rough logs. The walls feel cold, yet sturdier than expected. You sense settlers must have felt the same balance of fear and relief. Snow could trap them inside, but it also softened the wind and dulled the storm's noise, much like a thick blanket dulls the edges of a long night. You place your palm flat against the wall and close your eyes. There is a fragile stillness here. Outside, the storm continues, but inside, the cabin feels briefly suspended, as if held within a quiet pocket. You imagine a family huddled together on the straw mattress, breathing in rhythm, whispering prayers or sharing stories to distract themselves from the sound of snow creeping upward. You return to the door and push gently. The drift pushes back. You apply more pressure. The door opens only a narrow gap. Turning sideways, you slip out, brushing snow from your coat. A blast of wind strikes your face, jolting your senses. You pull the door closed, allowing the cabin to sink back into its muted calm. Outside, the light is brighter now, though still unforgiving. Snow reflects the thin daylight filtering through the clouds, giving the land a pale, unreal glow. Drifts roll across the clearing like frozen waves. You resume walking, each step sinking deep, each breath forming a faint mist that lifts and vanishes. As you move away from the buried cabin, you begin to grasp how snow could be both terrifying and protective for settlers. It could block exits, cut off escape, and threaten survival. Yet it could also shield against cutting winds that sliced through clothing and walls. Every winter night on the frontier must have been a careful negotiation with a force that acted as both adversary and ally. You pause on a small rise, listening to the storm change its tone. The wind moans across the hills in a low, drawn-out sound. Ice-laden branches tap together like wooden chimes. The noise feels ancient, older than settlements, older than any marked trail. You breathe deeply and let the cold settle into your thoughts. The story tightens around you, pulling you further into the core of a frontier winter. You take another step, then another, moving toward the next structure barely visible through the swirling white. Your journey is not over. The storm is still building, and the cabins ahead carry their own quiet lessons about how people once fought for rest during the harshest hours of the year. You push onward through the shifting snow, the storm brushing past you like something almost alive. Your legs ache with each step, and the snow tugs at your boots as if trying to pull you down into a long winter sleep you have no intention of taking. Peering through the blowing flakes, you notice another small shape to your left. It is not quite a house, more a cramped wooden box slumped in the clearing. As you draw closer, you see that its door stands slightly ajar, trembling on its worn leather hinges. Inside, the air feels oddly calm, even as cold moves through the space like a slow, steady stream. You look around the interior and find almost nothing. Only a flattened mound of straw in one corner and a few scraps of fabric scattered across the packed earth. There is no bed frame here. No proper mattress. No blanket that seems capable of doing more than pretending to provide warmth. You lower yourself onto the straw and feel its rough dryness through your gloves. It scratches your fingers. It pokes into your palm. It feels like a place where sleeping would require determination rather than comfort. You remain on your knees and imagine stretching out on this thin layer of straw while cold slowly creeps up your spine. You picture early settlers lying here wrapped in coats, scarves, and whatever cloth they still had after a long journey. You imagine them curling inward, pulling knees to chest, slowing their breathing to conserve heat. Even inside a cabin, the cold behaved like an unwelcome presence that refused to leave. A detail from early settlement records surfaces in your thoughts. Many families slept directly on the floor during their first winter because lumber was too limited or time too short to build raised beds. In some areas, people waited months before they could even consider making furniture. As you study the straw pile, that reality settles in. This rough bedding was not temporary for many families. It was their only option through long nights when temperatures dropped far below what the body could tolerate. You lift a handful of straw and let it fall back to the ground. It rustles softly, a fragile sound. A faint smell of old grass clings to your gloves, and you imagine how the room once smelled. Earth, damp wood, cold air, and the light sweetness of straw slightly warmed by human bodies. It is a very thin form of comfort, but it is still comfort. Your gaze shifts to a small cloth bag near the wall. It is torn open, with a few feathers spilling out. You pick one up and roll it between your fingers. It feels stiff from the cold. The sight brings back a faint memory from frontier accounts. One traveler wrote about settlers stuffing beds with anything soft they could gather. Sometimes they used feathers mixed with cattail fluff, dried moss, or even spare rope fibers. The result barely cushioned the body, but it added a small layer of insulation. You smile quietly at the idea of someone proudly claiming they had made a feather bed, even if it was little more than a lumpy sack. You lie back on the straw briefly, letting the chilled scent of the cabin fill your imagination. The roof creaks above you. A thin layer of frost clings to the rafters. Each time the wind strikes the cabin, a light dusting of snow falls through the cracks and lands on your coat in tiny, glittering flecks. Your breath clouds the air in slow, steady bursts, and you picture a family lying together, trying to match their breathing so the space between them stays warm. As you observe the room, you notice a narrow gap between two logs along the far wall. Through it, a thin stream of icy air slides across the straw. You press your hand into the draft and feel its sharp bite. Settlers would have used anything available to block gaps like this. Cloth scraps, mud mixed with grass, even strips of bark. Every opening mattered when you slept on the floor, because cold moved along the ground like an unrelenting tide. A small memory from frontier letters comes to mind. One writer described waking to find frost forming along the edge of a blanket. Even inside the cabin, moisture from their breath froze overnight, leaving a dusting of ice on their bedding. You run your fingers over the straw again and imagine the stiff, cold cotton blankets of that era. Waking up surrounded by frost must have carried both quiet beauty and deep unease. Your attention shifts to a broken wooden crate near the wall. It is empty, though a few nails stick out like crooked teeth. Someone may have planned to build a bed platform from crates like this, but never completed it. Materials were so limited that frontier families sometimes took apart wagons to make their first furniture. You imagine them weighing the choice between a more comfortable place to sleep and the ability to travel again when spring arrived. As you sit in the cabin, a quiet thought emerges. Researchers who study early pioneer living conditions note that families often rotated sleeping positions during winter. They moved bedding away from drafts, placed children in warmer corners, or rearranged straw piles nightly based on where the cold seeped through. Not all historians agree on how widespread this practice was. Some believe it happened almost everywhere. Others argue it was common mainly in regions with extreme cold. Sitting in this small room, it seems possible that both views are accurate, depending on the severity of the winter. You rise from the straw and walk to the wall. The wood feels rough beneath your gloves, split by cold and darkened by old sap. You press your palm against it and imagine a family doing the same, wondering if the wall could survive another night of heavy wind. You picture parents listening carefully for signs of failure. The squeak of a shifting log, the low moan of snow sliding from the roof, the sharp pop of wood tightening under cold. Each sound could bring comfort or fear, depending on how exhausted everyone was. You move to the opposite wall, where bundles of dried grass are lined along the base. Settlers used these bundles to block gaps beneath sleeping areas, hoping to stop cold from rising into their bodies. You crouch and touch one. It crumbles slightly, leaving a powdery trace on your glove. Even this fragile material must have felt valuable during a storm. It added one more layer between skin and frozen ground. You take a slow breath and look at the straw bed one last time. You imagine trying to fall asleep while the storm shook the world outside. You picture pulling your coat collar up and tucking your chin down to hold every bit of warmth. You imagine listening to the breathing of others nearby, each breath forming a small cloud above their faces. Survival depended less on comfort and more on staying close, staying still, and staying wrapped in whatever layers were available. When you finally stand, the cabin feels smaller than before. The walls lean inward slightly, creating a sense of fragile protection. You push the door open and let the wind surge inside. Snow presses against your legs at once, reminding you that your journey continues. You glance back at the straw pile. For a moment, you imagine lying there again. This time, you feel yourself drifting off, not from exhaustion, but from the steady rhythm of your own breathing. You pull the door closed behind you and face the storm once more. Snow swirls around your boots, and the cold curls around your ankles like a persistent cat. You begin walking toward the next cabin shape emerging through the haze. Each structure reveals another small lesson in how settlers tried to sleep through nights that threatened to swallow them whole. You move forward through the storm, your breath forming brief clouds that disappear almost as soon as they appear in the sharp air. The snowfall feels denser now, as though the sky is finally giving in to its burden. Each flake lands softly on your coat, sticking for a moment before melting just enough to leave a mild sting of cold against your skin. As you press on, another dark outline takes shape through the swirling white. This structure is larger than the earlier cabin, though its roof bends under the heavy load of snow. A thin stream of smoke slips from an opening near the peak, weak and unsteady, as if even the smoke hesitates to challenge the storm. When you reach the door, you notice an unfamiliar sound inside, a quiet snort, followed by a slow, steady rumble. You ease the door open a few inches and are met at once by a rush of warm, earthy air. You step inside and pause as your eyes adjust. This is more than a simple dwelling. It is a shared refuge for both people and animals. A rough wooden divider splits the room, rising only to chest height. On one side are bundles of straw, blankets, and a few crates arranged into sleeping areas for the family. On the other side, packed close together, stand a cow, 2 goats, and a thick-coated ox, its breath filling the space with slow clouds of steam. The warmth reaches you immediately, stronger than expected. You breathe in the mixed scent of animals, damp hay, and faint traces of sweat rising from bodies gathered tightly together. The smell is earthy and strong, but not unpleasant, just unmistakably alive. You can easily picture frontier families entering this space with deep relief, thankful for a source of heat that did not depend on limited firewood or an unreliable hearth. You step closer to the divider and rest your hand along its top edge. The ox shifts slightly, its large body giving off heat like a natural furnace. Frost clings around its neck, while the rest of its hide releases gentle steam into the sheltered air. You remain there briefly, feeling warmth seep through your gloves. It becomes clear why families chose this setup. It was simple, direct, and remarkably effective. A memory from early rural farming records comes to mind. Many settlers depended on the body heat of livestock during winter nights, especially when storms made it difficult to keep fires burning. In some regions, buildings known as longhouses sheltered both people and animals beneath a single roof. This approach conserved warmth and reduced the need for fuel during extreme cold. Standing here, you feel the practicality of that decision. The heat is undeniable. Even though the corners of the room remain cold, you move farther inside, the floorboards softened by layers of packed straw. On the family's side of the divider, a small mattress rests close to the wall. You kneel beside it, imagining a child sleeping near enough to sense the warmth coming through from the animals. You touch the blanket. It is made of rough wool, coarse against the skin, yet thick and dependable. A faint scent of lanolin still lingers in the fibers despite years of use. As you continue to take in the space, a small but interesting thought occurs to you. Some frontier families believed that sleeping near animals encouraged pleasant dreams. They said the steady breathing of a cow or the slow movement of a horse created a calming background sound, similar to what we might now call white noise. You smile slightly at the thought. Even now, the soft shifting and quiet sighs of the animals feel unexpectedly soothing in the frozen surroundings. You walk toward a narrow window where frost forms detailed patterns across the wooden frame. You press a finger to the glass and watch the ice turn into tiny beads of water. The window rattles as wind strikes the outer wall. You imagine lying here at night, listening to the storm outside while warm breath from the animals drifts through the darkness. The contrast would have been striking. Outside, a world determined to freeze everything solid. Inside, a space sustained by living warmth. As you stand there, another idea surfaces, one often mentioned in frontier research. Scholars disagree on whether this shared living arrangement was an emergency solution or a common practice. Some suggest it was only used in the harshest conditions. Others argue that housing people and livestock together was far more widespread than modern assumptions allow, particularly in regions where winter held the land in place for months at a time. You consider this perspective, recognizing how survival needs often shaped daily life more than comfort or design. You turn back toward the animals. The cow looks at you, her dark eyes catching the dim light of a lantern hanging from a support beam. She flicks an ear, scattering a few droplets into the air. You raise your hand, palm open. She leans forward slightly, her warm breath brushing your glove. The moment feels quietly meaningful. In the most severe winters, animals like these were more than property. They were silent partners in endurance. You move again toward the sleeping area. A small pile of blankets rests neatly in a corner. You lift one and shake it lightly. Tiny dust motes rise and drift through the lantern glow. The blanket smells of wool and earth, with just a hint of smoke. You picture someone wrapping it around their shoulders and settling down for the night, listening as the storm dulls outside and the animals shift slowly nearby. The storm strikes the walls once more, and snow slips through a narrow opening in the roof. You step beneath it and look up. The boards above are warped and patched with bark and bundled reeds. It is not perfect shelter, but it serves its purpose. Snow falls through like scattered sparks, dusting your coat before melting away. You brush it off and draw in another deep breath of the warm air. You head toward the exit, your boots leaving clear prints in the straw-covered floor. Before stepping out, you glance once more at the family's sleeping space. Even with the storm pressing in from all sides, the room feels steady, grounded by the quiet presence of the animals. The air carries a low sense of warmth and life. The cold waits outside, but for a brief moment, you understand how reassuring this arrangement must have been in the heart of winter. You open the door. A burst of wind rushes in, pulling warmth from your face. You step back into the storm and let the door close behind you. Snow gathers quickly around your boots, yet the memory of shared warmth remains, lingering like a dull glow in your chest. You continue onward, aware that the next shelter will reveal yet another aspect of frontier winter survival. Leaving the animal-warmed refuge behind, the world feels colder now that comfort has been known. The wind slips beneath your collar and brushes your neck with sharp insistence. You pause briefly, tightening your coat, wishing you could carry even a trace of that steady heat with you. But the frontier offers no room for wishes. So you continue forward, tracing a shallow dip in the snow that may once have been a walkway. Ahead, another cabin appears, its outline blurred by thick layers of snow settled across the roof. As you draw closer, you see the door is shut, its edges sealed by a narrow band of ice. You pull at it once, then again, until a sharp snap breaks the frozen grip and the door opens just enough for you to slip inside. The interior is dark and muted. A few damaged chairs rest against the wall, their legs twisted from long exposure to cold. In one corner, there is a pile of clothing, rigid with frost, yet carefully arranged, as though the family who lived here once prepared these garments nightly as their own form of protection. Heavy wool coats sit on top. Beneath them are worn shirts stacked 3 or 4 layers deep. Thick scarves lie folded, stiff enough to stand when frozen. You kneel and lift one coat. It feels far heavier than modern winter clothing, and the rough fabric scrapes your wrist even through your glove. You shake it lightly, and small crystals of frost fall to the floor. In the quiet room, it is easy to picture someone pulling this coat tightly around themselves at night, trying to hold onto whatever warmth remained after a full day of labor in the cold. A practical detail from early settlement records comes to mind. Many families slept wearing all the clothing they owned, not out of comfort, but because frostbite was a threat even indoors. Children slept with mittens on. Adults wrapped scarves around their heads and stuffed spare shirts into every opening. You imagine doing the same, adding layers until movement becomes awkward, yet warmth is finally trapped beneath wool and linen. You set the coat aside and look at the sleeping area beside it. Instead of a mattress, several layers of clothing are stacked into a rough cushion. You press your hand against it. The surface is uneven and lumpy, but soft enough to ease the bite of the frozen floor. This pile may have served as a bed for one parent, or perhaps an entire family gathered close together. You sit on the edge of the garment stack and let its uneven shape settle beneath you. Cold seeps through the floorboards, but the layered fabric creates a small barrier, just enough to imagine falling asleep if exhaustion were strong enough. As you sit, you can almost feel winter weighing down your eyelids, the kind of tiredness that dulls sound and slows each breath. An unusual note from frontier folklore comes to mind. Some settlers believed that sleeping under many layers created a strange heaviness, pushing the body into deeper, slower rest. It may sound strange now, but you can imagine the steady pressure of thick wool, the feeling of being wrapped and held in a world with little comfort. Perhaps those dreams offered brief relief from winter's constant strain. You glance toward the wall, where a line of wooden pegs juts from the logs. Several garments still hang there, frozen into stiff shapes like empty figures. You reach out and touch a sleeve. The fabric crackles softly. You picture a settler grabbing it on a bitter morning, pulling it on with fingers too numb to manage the buttons. You let your hand drop and settle deeper into the corner. The room grows quieter. Wind slips through a narrow gap, brushing your cheek with a sharp, cold draft. You pull one blanket from the clothing pile and place it over your shoulders. It carries a faint smell of old wool, soil, and lingering smoke. Its weight feels steady, almost reassuring. A memory from textile history studies comes into focus. Frontier clothing was often repaired countless times, patched and reshaped until very little of the original fabric remained. Some families wore the same garments for years, layering them until seams strained, simply to keep the cold out. Looking around, you sense that every piece of fabric here has endured many winters. You hold the blanket closer and breathe slowly, imagining the settlers preparing for sleep each night. They put on their heaviest coats, added scarves, shawls, mittens, and any clothing not needed by others. Sleep was not a moment of ease. It was a careful routine designed to preserve body heat until morning. As you rest against the wall, another thought surfaces, one often raised in academic discussions of frontier survival. Experts disagree on how effective heavy layering truly was during extreme winter nights. Some argue that too many layers restricted circulation and disrupted rest. Others believe people survived precisely because they wore their warmest clothing, even under blankets. Sitting here, you can sense both views. The warmth building beneath the blanket is real, yet the tension at your neck reminds you that the layers also limit movement. You take a slow breath and imagine adjusting your clothing as a settler might. Loosening a scarf, tightening a coat, pulling sleeves down to cover your wrists, smoothing the blanket over your legs. Each small adjustment changes how the cold reaches you. You begin to understand how closely early families knew their clothing, how every stitch played a role in survival. Your attention shifts to a small wooden crate beneath the window. You lift the lid carefully. Inside, several extra shirts are folded neatly. The fabric is coarse and hand-spun, with uneven threads running through it. You lift one and hold it toward the lantern. The weave is loose, yet dense enough to trap warmth when layered. You imagine a mother settling the shirt over her child's shoulders before bed, humming softly to distract them from the storm shaking the roof. You return the shirt and rest your palm on the crate. The wood is cold, and faint vibrations from the wind travel through it. You close your eyes and listen. Outside, the storm presses against the walls, but inside the cabin, clothing forms a thin yet determined shield. You stand, letting the blanket fall back onto the pile. The cold immediately bites at your skin. Your boots strike the floorboards as you move toward the door, and the cabin seems to sway slightly with the force of the storm. You pause for one last look around. The clothes, blankets, and rough bedding quietly explain survival in a place without constant fire. Heat was uncertain. Warmth had to be earned, layer by layer, stitch by stitch, night after night. You lift the latch and open the door. A rush of icy wind sweeps in, sharp enough to sting your eyes. You step outside and pull your collar tight as snow spins around you again, restless and alive. You move forward into the next drift, aware that the frontier still holds more lessons about how people once slept through nights colder than fear itself. Leaning into the storm, you push onward, the cold pricking your cheeks as deep snow tugs at your legs. The world feels muted now, as though the snow has wrapped itself around your ears. You notice dark shapes beneath the white ground, shadows that could be rocks, shrubs, or the remains of an abandoned wagon. Your breath lingers in the air in slow, steady clouds. Each exhale seems to measure time passing in this frozen expanse. Ahead, a structure begins to take form. This cabin is smaller than the others, its roof bent inward after years of heavy snowfall. The door is tightly shut, pressed into its frame as if the wind once tried to force it open and finally failed. You push against it gently. Nothing happens. You lean forward and try again. A thin cracking sound breaks the silence as the frost seal gives way. The door creaks open bit by bit until you slip inside and pull it closed behind you. The interior is nearly dark. Only faint traces of gray light seep through a small opening in the roof. You pause, standing still and listening. At first, there is only the storm outside, its distant roar softened by thick wooden walls. Then you hear it, a slow, almost delicate rasping sound. You step closer to the center of the room and finally see the source. A few small embers glow inside a shallow clay bowl set into a hollow in the dirt floor. They give off very little light, but as you reach toward them, a thin thread of warmth brushes your gloved fingers. These are not flames, nor even the remains of a dying fire. They are simply coals, faintly holding on to their last glow in the cold. You lower yourself to your knees and hold your hands above them. The warmth is slight, almost hesitant, but it reaches you. On a night like this, it would have mattered more than most people realize. You examine the clay bowl. Its edges are chipped, and the base is coated with thick soot. Nearby lie a few charred wood splinters, as if someone broke sticks by hand to keep the embers alive. You picture a family gathered around this small pocket of heat, warming their hands and speaking quietly in the dim light. They would have watched the embers carefully, knowing that if the last glow disappeared, they might not find enough dry wood in the morning to restart the fire. A memory from frontier field notes comes to mind. Many settlers depended on ember preservation instead of full fires during severe storms. Firewood was valuable, and open flames could pull smoke into poorly ventilated cabins. So families kept small bowls of coals alive overnight, feeding them tiny scraps when necessary and shielding them with pottery pieces or flat stones. It required patience and attention, an all-night watch. You lean closer to the embers. Their glow pulses gently, brightening slightly when the wind shakes the cabin walls. You pick up a small twig lying beside the bowl and place it carefully on top. The glowing center expands, releasing a thin curl of warmth into the air. You watch closely and feel a quiet sense of reassurance settle in your chest. Even a single ember could mean survival when the cold was relentless. As you scan the room, something else draws your attention. A small wooden box rests against the wall, partially filled with dry moss and curled bark. These are clear fire-starting materials. You lift a handful and feel how light it is, how easily it could catch a spark. It makes sense. Families would have needed a backup if the embers failed. Still, you sense the constant worry that must have followed every winter night. Waking to a cold hearth with no fire left was a serious danger on the frontier. A brief passage from a traveler's account surfaces in your thoughts. One wanderer described settlers who whispered to their embers as if encouraging a timid animal to stay alive. They blew on them gently, shielded them with their hands, and treated them almost like companions. It may sound sentimental now, but kneeling here in the half-light, the idea feels believable. When warmth is scarce, anything that provides it is treated with quiet respect. You shift your weight and sit back against a rough wooden beam. Cold seeps up through the floor and settles along your spine. Even with the embers nearby, the room feels fragile, balanced between warmth and freezing. You imagine lying on the straw mattress a few steps away. Knowing the coals might not last until morning, you picture a father waking every hour to check the bowl, making sure the red glow remains. A thought from academic discussions about frontier survival comes to mind. Some researchers note that ember preservation required skill and constant care, while others question how reliably families managed it through long winters. The records differ. Some settlers claimed they kept a single coal alive for days. Others admitted their embers often died overnight, forcing them to use flint and steel at dawn. You consider both perspectives as you continue watching the slow rhythm of the coals. You reach out and touch the dirt beside the bowl. It is warm within a small circle around the clay, warmth that fades quickly as your hand moves away. You trace that edge with your fingertips, imagining a child creeping close during the night, drawn to the heat like an insect to a faint light. You imagine parents gently pulling the child back, warning that embers could still burn. The balance between comfort and danger must have been constant. Your eyes drift upward to the low ceiling. Soot marks form faint arcs across the beams. The patterns suggest that small fires or embers were used here often, but never strong enough to send flames toward the roof. The settlers understood their limits. They needed warmth, but they also feared a fire that could turn a hard-won shelter into ash within minutes. You inhale slowly, taking in the scent of cold wood and faint smoke. The smell feels old, almost timeless, as if the room has endured countless winters in silence. You close your eyes briefly and picture the earliest families gathered here, wrapped in layers, huddled near the embers, quietly sharing stories to distract themselves from the storm outside. When you open your eyes, the embers still glow, small, steady, and persistent. You give the twig one final gentle nudge toward the center of the bowl. The glow brightens slightly, enough to cast faint, shifting shadows across the logs. You stand slowly, stretching as the cold slips back under your coat. You walk toward the door. When you open it, the wind rushes in, threatening to snuff out the fragile embers behind you. You shut the door quickly, unwilling to let your brief presence undo the warmth someone once worked so hard to preserve. Outside, the storm greets you like a familiar opponent, snow swirling around your boots and tugging at your sleeves. You exhale, letting the cold sting your lips, and begin moving toward the next shelter. The night still stretches far ahead, and more stories remain buried beneath the snow. You step back into the storm, pulling the door closed behind you, as if guarding the small ember glow you leave behind. The wind moves around you in a restless spiral, pulling at your coat and slipping cold air down your sleeves. You take a steady breath and continue forward, feeling each snowflake strike your skin with sharp clarity. The cold presses deeper now, quietly reinforcing that comfort never lasts long in this place. As you walk, the land becomes a smooth stretch of white. The horizon fades from view. Your boots sink with every step, and the snow compresses beneath you with a soft crunch. Then you notice it, another cabin, barely visible through the drifting snow. You move toward it slowly, step by step, until the outline of the structure becomes clear. The door hangs slightly open, moving inward and outward with the uneven rhythm of the storm. You slip inside and close it quickly, allowing the space to settle into a quiet stillness. This cabin feels smaller than the others. There are fewer tools, fewer signs of regular work. What draws your attention immediately are the shapes on the floor. 3 people, formed into bundled outlines, tucked tightly together beneath layered quilts and patched blankets. You step closer and sense faint warmth still lingering, as if the bodies that slept here left it behind. The sleeping area is narrow. Each form is close enough that their shoulders would have touched. You consider how settlers arranged themselves in such limited space. Survival left little room for privacy. When night came, even strangers or neighbors seeking shelter pressed together. Warmth meant life, and life depended on closeness. You kneel beside the quilts and trace your fingers along the stitched edges. The fabric feels coarse, but dense. You lift one corner and feel the heavy pull of many layers beneath. This is not refined bedding. It is a collection of whatever materials were available. Pieces of worn clothing, cleaned burlap, wool taken from coats too damaged to fix. All of it sewn into one living blanket, growing thicker over time as new layers were added. You imagine settlers lying side by side, listening as their breathing settled into a shared rhythm. You picture the unexpected warmth of a stranger's arm nearby, the quiet movement of someone shifting, the soft sound of a child's breath in the dark. A detail from early settlement journals comes to mind. Many frontier families practiced what was often called shared body sleeping during severe winters. They gathered tightly together, covering everyone with quilts like a single shell. The purpose was practical. Hold heat before the cold could take it away. Standing here, you can almost sense the warmth that once stayed trapped beneath these layers. A remaining trace of something that kept people alive through long nights. You lift another edge of the quilt and notice a small opening between layers. A memory from traveler accounts crosses your thoughts. Some visitors wrote about how uncomfortable it felt to sleep beside strangers during winter stops. Yet after only a short time wrapped in shared warmth, discomfort faded and exhaustion took over. Cold had a way of removing distance faster than conversation ever could. You slide your hand beneath the blankets and touch the straw mattress below. Some areas feel warm, others cool, as if the bed still recalls where bodies once rested. The straw shifts under your palm, releasing a light scent of dry grass and earth. You breathe it in and imagine falling asleep here, surrounded by warmth created as much by people as by fabric. As you remain there, a small memory from winter folklore surfaces. Some families told children that sleeping together was not only practical but lucky. Each person, they said, helped keep winter at bay simply by being present. Whether belief or comfort, the idea likely eased fear, especially in young minds during nights when storms shook the walls. You shift slightly and rest against a log beam. The cabin is dim, lit only by pale light slipping through a narrow crack in the shutters. Outside, the storm continues with steady force. Inside, the air feels heavier, shaped by the memory of bodies pressed close together. For a moment, you close your eyes and imagine settling in beside others, protected by shared warmth and quiet trust. Another thought surfaces, often discussed in studies of early rural life. Researchers do not fully agree on how common shared sleeping was among unrelated settlers. Some argue it happened mainly during emergencies. Others suggest it was a regular winter practice in isolated areas. Evidence supports both views, which explains why the debate remains. Standing here, It seems less about tradition and more about necessity. You open your eyes and stand slowly, allowing the quilts to fall back into place. The cabin's silence deepens. A thin stream of cold air slips down from the roof, brushing your shoulders. You smooth the blankets with your gloves, feeling the slight resistance beneath them. Even empty, the space feels full of lived experience. You move toward the door and rest your hand on the wooden frame. The cabin creaks softly as the wind pushes against it, the walls shifting with familiar strain. You glance once more at the shared bedding. The image stays with you, several bodies wrapped beneath one heavy quilt, forming a small center of warmth surrounded by cold. You open the door and step back into the storm, the chill settling across your face. Snow spins through the air with renewed force. You take a deep breath of the sharp night and begin walking again. Another cabin waits ahead. Its outline faint, yet steady, drawing you farther into the winter landscape. You lower your head against the wind and push through another drift. Your boots sink deep, each step feeling weighted. Snow gathers on your lashes, softening the world into white blur. You pause briefly and listen. The storm hums around you in long, uneven tones. Ahead, you notice another cabin partly buried by snow, its roof bent beneath the weight of ice. You move closer, brushing frost from your face. The door stands slightly open, rocking gently in the wind. You step inside and pull it closed, allowing the storm to fade into a distant sound. The interior feels unexpectedly close. Not warm, not secure, but contained. Quilts are stacked high in the center, forming a raised mound. Some are faded to pale colors. Others patched with rough fabric. As you approach, the scent of old wool and dried herbs rises. These are not simple blankets. They are burrowing layers, built thick enough to surround a person completely. You kneel and press your hand into the pile. The material sinks, then slowly returns. The settlers here clearly understood how to create warmth by retreating deep into bedding, allowing body heat to form a small protected space beneath the layers. You lift the corner of one quilt, and beneath it rests another, heavier, stitched together from deer hide scraps, worn cotton, and pieces of burlap softened by time. Below that lies a third layer, packed with frayed fibers that push through small tears. You picture a family slipping under these layers each night, drawing their knees close, letting the darkness and weight of the bedding surround them like a shield. A passage from early household journals comes to mind. In regions with brutal winters, many families built deep sleeping nests, stacking blankets so high that only a nose remained visible for air. Children often disappeared entirely beneath the quilts, their quiet breathing forming small pockets of warmth in the coldest rooms. You imagine it clearly now, a small figure vanishing under blankets, leaving behind only the soft rustle of straw and wool. You sit beside the bedding and slide your hand under the top layer. The warmth is faint, stored within the insulation rather than left by any recent sleeper. Even so, that trapped heat feels almost indulgent after the storm outside. You close your eyes and imagine crawling beneath the quilts, letting each layer settle over you like gentle snowfall. The weight would slow your breathing. The darkness would blur the edges of the storm. As you linger on that thought, a small detail from a settler's memoir surfaces. Some families tucked warm herbs or crushed pine needles between quilt layers, believing the scent calmed the mind and eased winter stress. You lean closer, and yes, there is a trace of dried lavender, or perhaps sage, hidden deep in the fabric. The smell is subtle but steadying. You pull one quilt closer to study the stitching. The patterns are uneven, clearly sewn by hands guided by need rather than training. Each seam carries a quiet history. Here is a patch cut from a child's worn shirt. There, a strip once part of a winter coat. Survival often left its mark on ordinary objects, and these blankets carry those signs openly. Shifting to the far edge of the bedding, you notice how the quilts slope downward toward the floor. Beneath them, straw is piled thick, creating a gentle incline that encourages sleepers to burrow deeper. You run your fingers through the straw and hear its dry, papery whisper. It is tightly packed, clean, and faintly sweet in scent. A bed like this works by holding heat within layers. Once inside, warmth stays close to the body, building slowly until sleep becomes inevitable. You recall studies on frontier domestic life. Historians note that winter bedding varied widely, but the burrow style was especially common in areas with long, severe storms. There is debate about how widespread it truly was. Some scholars argue most settlers relied on heavy blankets because fireplaces failed during strong winds. Others believe the method was more typical where snow blocked chimneys entirely. You consider both views as your hand traces the quilt's heavy edge. In such conditions, any reliable source of warmth likely spread quickly. You draw one quilt around your shoulders and let its weight settle. It presses gently, offering a sense of reassurance, while the earthy smell of wool fills the air. A memory from frontier children's recollections surfaces. Some children joked that leaving the blankets in the morning felt like climbing out of a warm cave into a frozen world. You smile at the thought. Wrapped in the quilt now, it feels accurate. You lie back across the edge of the bedding, the fabric draped over your legs. The storm sounds softer here, muted by thick walls and dense layers. Snow taps the roof in uneven beats, like a careful knock from cold fingers. You breathe slowly, letting the rhythm blend with the quiet. You imagine settlers settling in together, shifting to find warmth, whispering late-night stories or humming soft lullabies to calm uneasy children. In long winter nights, these habits mattered. They turned harsh cabins into brief refuges, even as the wind worked to unsettle everything. You sit up and gently fold the quilt back into place. Your fingers linger on the fabric, acknowledging the effort behind it. Every patch holds meaning. Every stitch reflects a decision. These blankets were not made for comfort alone. They were made because winter required them. You move toward the door, glance once more at the mound of bedding, and feel a quiet warmth rise in your chest. The room remains cold, but the quilts still carry traces of comfort earned through endurance. When you open the door, the storm meets you with its sharp breath. Snow swirls around your boots, and the wind bites at your ears. You tighten your coat, step into the shifting white, and head toward the next shape emerging in the distance, prepared for another look into winter's long night. You push forward again, boots sinking into drifts that absorb sound and soften the world's edges. The storm eases briefly, just enough for the sky to glow a pale silver. You take it as a signal and continue. Slowly, the next cabin appears. Low roof, solid walls, and a faint trace curling near the doorway. Not smoke, not breath, just a suggestion of warmth escaping between logs. Inside, the air is cold but not harsh. Instead, a mild, hopeful heat lingers near the center. You step forward until your boot nudges something round and heavy. A smooth, river-shaped stone lies wrapped in thick cloth, still releasing gentle warmth. You crouch and touch it, surprised by the steady heat. It spreads softly rather than burning. You lift the stone in your gloved hands. Its shape is nearly perfect, worn smooth by years in flowing water. Settlers collected stones like these, heated them directly in the fire until they glowed faintly, then wrapped them in cloth or hide to use as portable heaters. You can picture it clearly, the crackling fire, someone turning the stones with a stick, children watching as dull gray surfaces shifted to a soft orange glow, ready to be placed under blankets at night. Holding the stone close, you notice how slowly the warmth travels. It is never too hot, only comforting, easing the bite of cold air. You set it back down carefully, understanding why such stones were valued through winter. They held heat long after flames faded, offering families a measure of protection against freezing nights. A practical note from early homestead records comes to mind. Many settlers preferred river stones because they warmed evenly and resisted cracking. Field stones, by contrast, often split when heated too quickly, sometimes breaking apart without warning. River stones shaped by flowing water over many years were safer and held heat longer. Settlers understood this clearly. You imagine someone walking along a frozen riverbank, choosing the smoothest stones they could find, thinking ahead to nights when fire could not be trusted. You step farther into the cabin and notice several more stones wrapped in cloth and tucked beneath a stack of blankets. The fabric is worn and patched many times, carrying a faint scent of smoke. You lift another stone. It is still warm, not as hot as the first, but warm enough to feel. These stones were likely heated earlier in the evening and carried around the cabin to warm beds, hands, and feet so cold they barely moved. A quiet and unusual note from a traveler's journal comes to mind. He wrote that some families used heated stones in practical ways, placing them at the foot of the bed not just for warmth, but to dry damp socks or mittens overnight. It seems minor, almost insignificant, but drying wet clothing could prevent frostbite or sickness. You picture socks draped over a heated stone, faint steam rising in the dark while the wind roared outside. You stand and walk toward a corner where a small pile of firewood rests. The pieces are short, closer to kindling than full logs. It appears the family knew a storm could steal their fire at any moment. Heated stones may have been their most dependable source of warmth. You touch the nearest log. It feels dry enough, though the surface is crusted with frost. You imagine someone brushing snow away each evening, trying to ensure the wood would light quickly. You glance up at the ceiling. The beams are dark with soot and arranged carefully overhead. A narrow roof vent allows smoke to escape, though ice partially seals it. You can see how heated stones would have been safer during a blizzard. Fires could fill a room with smoke if vents froze shut. Hot stones, however, required no steady airflow. A reflection drawn from historical environmental studies comes to mind. Scholars disagree on how much frontier families relied on heated stones in harsh winters. Some believe stones were only a supplement when fires burned low. Others argue they were essential during storm seasons when strong winds made open flames unreliable or dangerous indoors. Standing in this dim cabin, both views seem reasonable. The stones give off steady warmth, but they cannot replace a real fire. They simply preserve heat when flames cannot be depended on. You walk to the far wall where a long, low bed frame sits. Several blankets lie unevenly across it. You pull one aside and see stones placed beneath, resting like small sun-warmed anchors. When settlers lay here, the heat from the stones would sink into the straw and slowly rise toward their cold bodies. You run your hand over the straw and feel a trace of warmth still present. You sit on the edge of the bed and cup your hands around one of the stones under the blanket. The heat presses gently into your palms. You imagine what it felt like to climb into bed on a night like this, feet pressed against warm stones, heavy blankets pulled close, and exhaustion finally easing the body into sleep. A faint sound breaks the silence. Soft tapping against the window shutters. Snow drifting sideways again. You look toward the walls as the storm reclaims the space around the cabin. Inside, though, the stones create a small refuge. You breathe in the grounded smell of warm cloth and faint charcoal and let the quiet settle. Beside the bed, a small woven basket holds extra cloth wrappings. You lift one. Its surface is scorched in places, evidence of many nights spent holding hot stones. The fabric feels rough but strong, woven with thick yarn meant to withstand heat. You imagine careful hands wrapping each stone, testing the temperature by hovering fingers just above it, adjusting the cloth so no one would be burned in the dark. You place the wrapping back and stand slowly. The warmth lingers on your hands for a moment before fading into the cold. You walk toward the door and pause for a final look at the stones resting on the floor. They seem to breathe softly, each one holding onto the last pieces of stored heat. You open the door. A rush of icy wind slips inside, cutting across your collar and stinging your face. You step back into the storm, pulling your coat tight as snow swirls around you. The cold feels sharper now that your hands remember the warmth of the stones. Still, you move forward. Ahead waits another shelter, another lesson in surviving nights without a fireplace. The storm has many stories left to offer. You lean into the wind again, letting the cold settle into every seam of your coat. As you move toward the next dim shape on the horizon, snow curls around your boots in restless spirals, as if the storm itself is urging you away from the shelters scattered across this frozen land. Your breath forms long white trails. You rub your hands together inside your gloves, thinking of the warm stones from the last cabin and wishing you could carry one with you. You reach the next structure and notice a thin line of steam drifting from a gap beneath the door. Not smoke, not breath, something softer. You push the door open, and a gentle wave of warmth, faint but unmistakable, touches your face. Inside, A long wooden table stands near the center of the room. On it sit several clay cups, some still half filled with liquid that has cooled to a light brown. A kettle rests nearby, blackened from repeated use. The air carries a mild scent of herbs steeped in hot water. You step forward and lift one of the cups. The liquid is no longer hot, but the rim still holds warmth from earlier. You take a sip. The flavor is faint and slightly bitter, yet comforting. You set the cup down and notice a small basket beside the kettle. Inside are dried leaves, thin twigs, and narrow strips of bark. These were not luxury teas. They were drinks made for survival. You imagine settlers gathering whatever plants remained usable through winter. Pine needles steeped in hot water for a sharp, clean taste. Dried berries simmered until they released a hint of sweetness. Even tree bark boiled into a thin drink that carried more resolve than pleasure. In a world without steady heat, warm drinks acted as internal fires, offering comfort one sip at a time. A note from early winter journals comes back to you. Many families brewed hot water even when they had nothing meaningful to add, simply because the warmth spread through the body and brought relief. Some called it warming water. Others called it hope in a cup. You look at the kettle and imagine a mother pouring warm liquid into cups as the storm shook the walls, handing them carefully to children wrapped in mismatched blankets. You run your fingers along the kettle's rim. The metal is cold now, but you can picture it moments earlier, gently steaming in the dim room. Settlers often boiled water in turns, letting the heat drift into the cabin air, even if only briefly. Each cup nourished the body from within, offering warmth that lingered longer than the firelight alone. Circling the table, a traveler's notes recall another small, unusual custom. Some families added crushed wild mint or dried birch twigs to their drinks, believing the scent calmed the nerves during fierce storms. The flavor was mild, sometimes bitter, but the aroma provided a moment of peace when the world outside sounded sharp enough to shake the soul. You lift a cup again, taking a small sip, imagining the same comforting ritual. Outside, the storm thuds heavily against the walls, making the window frame tremble. A faint line of frost creeps across the shutter, like a delicate painting. The cold presses in, insistent, unrelenting. But inside the cabin, the lingering warmth of the drinks softens the air just enough to breathe more easily. You move to the corner where a small clay pot rests over a few fading embers. It must have held boiling water earlier. Mineral lines streak its sides, and the handle is wrapped in cloth to protect bare hands. Touching it, you feel faint warmth, a quiet reminder of recent human presence. Sitting on a low stool beside the embers, you stretch your hands toward the thin radiating heat. You picture a family here earlier, a father coaxing the embers to life, a mother pouring warm drinks, children hunched over cups, letting the steam shield their faces from the cold. Researchers suggest that hot drinks were as much psychologically grounding as physically warming, offering frontier families a ritual that helped them endure long winter nights. Others argue that the warmth truly helped conserve body heat. The debate lingers in academic circles, but in this dim cabin, the question is unnecessary. A warm drink in a frozen world is comfort in any form. You lift the kettle, feeling its weight tug slightly against your arm. Even empty, it holds significance. Tilting it gently, you imagine the soft glug of water into a waiting cup. You cup it with both hands, feeling heat spread slowly up your wrists, circle your ribs, warm your breath. Rising, you move to the bedding corner, where several mugs sit beside folded quilts. Someone has clearly enjoyed warm tea or pine brew before slipping under those covers. Touching a quilt, you notice its fabric is cool now, but the faint scent of herbs lingers, as if steam once rolled over it. Closing your eyes, you imagine curling under those blankets after a warm drink, letting the heat soothe your body, calm your mind, and ease the trembling that winter storms often bring. Opening your eyes, you take in the room one last time. The cups, kettle, herbs, lingering steam. These small comforts were settlers' versions of modern hot chocolate or tea, but with higher stakes. A few degrees of warmth could decide whether one woke in the morning or not. You move toward the door, gripping the handle with a gloved hand. Opening it, a sharp burst of wind strikes your face. You step outside, pulling the door closed as the storm resumes its relentless chorus. Ahead, more cabins appear in the dim distance. You tuck your chin, adjust your collar, and keep moving, carrying the memory of warm cups and rising steam. The storm hasn't calmed. If anything, it seems impatient, flinging sharp flakes into your cheeks as you trudge forward. You keep one arm close to your chest, holding on to the faint memory of warmth, even though it's already faded from your skin. A silhouette emerges ahead, low and wide, built from carefully stacked logs. The roof sags slightly under snow, but not dangerously. At the door, a simple hook holds it closed against the wind. Lifting it, you step inside. The first thing you notice is the scent, earthy, musky, wild. Animal hides stored for warmth hang along the walls and over wooden pegs. Deer hides, softened from hours of scraping. Fox pelts stitched together in patchwork, thick bear skins folded, their edges brushing the floor. Running a gloved hand along a deer hide, you feel its softness, a trace of the forest it came from. Further inside, you find a pile of layered hides forming a sleeping nest. Soft furs are inside, tougher hides form the outer shell. Kneeling, you touch the edge, it is still warm. Even without bodies inside, the hides retain heat far better than wool alone. You imagine slipping under them, feeling their weight settle onto your chest, sealing you in with your own breath. Old letters from trapping communities note that winter households relied heavily on animal hides, not just for clothing but for sleeping coverings. Deer and elk provided warmth. Fox and wolf added softness. Bears, though rare, offered immense insulation. Holding a fox pelt, its thick, glossy fur tipped with white, you recall how some families believed fox hides carried night warmth, retaining heat longer than other furs. Whether superstition or fact, the warmth feels real. Draping it over your shoulders, you sense the heat seep down your back, grounding you. Settlers layered fur over clothing before bed, creating a warm, secure nest in the heart of winter. Setting aside the fox pelt, you examine the bear hide near the wall. Dark, thick, and heavy, lifting it requires both hands. You haul part of it upward, feeling its weight pull downward, a reminder of the extreme measures necessary to endure winter's harshness. Sleeping under this hide must have felt like being held by warmth itself. Its size is enough for a family to share, edges tucked around shoulders to block out drafts. As you carefully lower it, a memory from frontier children's anecdotes comes to mind. Some children claimed they fell asleep faster when wrapped in pelts, as the fur softened the sound of the wind outside. It created a quiet nest, shielding them from the storm's sharpness. You sit on the floor, letting your fingers glide across the overlapping hides. Each texture is different, some soft and velvety, others coarse, but all promise a warmth that blankets alone cannot match. You can almost hear a parent urging a child to burrow beneath 2 deer hides before the storm worsened. You picture a teenager reluctantly sharing a bear pelt with a younger sibling, both stretching toward the warmest spot. Your gaze rises to the drying line above. Strips of hide hang stiff in the cold, likely used to patch older furs or wrap feet as makeshift socks. Frontier families wasted little. Every part of an animal that offered warmth became essential winter gear. You examine a large elk hide draped over a beam. Its underside is soft, almost suede-like. Pressing your palm flat, you feel the faint warmth it still retains. Thoughts from studies on early subsistence living surface. Scholars debate whether hide bedding was mostly used in northern settlements or throughout frontier regions. Some argue forested families relied heavily on furs, while others see hide bedding as universal wherever winters were harsh. Touching the hides here, it's clear that furs were not merely useful, they were vital. You lift a smaller pelt and drape it over your shoulders. The scent is strong at first, earthy and slightly smoky from the tanning process, but soon it becomes comforting, a quiet reminder that survival often came from nature's gifts. You imagine lying here at night, wrapped in furs, hearing the soft rustle each time someone shifts. Placing the small pelt back, you approach the layered hide nest. You ease into it, letting the fur settle beneath you. Warmth spreads immediately, even without anyone else present. The hides cradle your body, sealing in heat from your own breath. You pull a larger hide over your legs, feeling its softness brush against your clothing. It's easy to picture drifting off, pressed under layers of quiet warmth until the outside world feels distant. You inhale slowly, appreciating the room's silence. Outside, the storm rages, but the thick hides hanging on the walls absorb much of the noise. Their natural insulation creates a cocoon of calm. Closing your eyes briefly, you let the peace sink in. Standing up, you smooth the hides into place and move toward the door. Before stepping out, you glance around. Furs draped like protective spirits, stacked in warm nests, the scent of the forest lingering in every corner. Opening the door, the storm hits immediately, but the memory of the warmth steadies you. Snow swirls around your boots, cold nipping at your cheeks. You tighten your coat and continue walking toward the next cabin, a faint shape emerging in the drifting haze, promising another glimpse of how early settlers faced winter nights. The wind rushes around your ears, snowflakes whirling in chaotic spirals, brushing your cheeks with icy needles. Your boots crunch through fresh snow, each step sinking deeper than expected. Ahead, the next cabin stands half-obscured, logs darkened by moisture, seams glinting with thin ribbons of ice. You lean into the storm until your fingers grip the latch. Inside, the first thing you notice is the draft. Icy air streams across your feet, slipping through gaps between logs and floorboards. This cabin is colder than the others, even colder than the open air, as wind claims it for itself. Closing the door, you survey the room. Wide but unfinished, its hastily stacked logs leave uneven cracks. Some gaps are thin as threads, others wide enough to fit a finger. Through one, snow drifts sideways. You shiver, imagining settlers realizing their walls weren't airtight. Crouching near a crack, you place your hand beside it. The wind pierces through, chilling your knuckles. Along the wall, dried clumps of mud mixed with straw or grass catch your eye. Picking at one, you recognize the settlers' windproofing, doorbing. During sudden storms, families collected clay from riverbanks or frost-softened soil, mixing it with grass or moss and pressing it into gaps. In winter, it was less a technique than a desperate measure. You kneel again, crumbling a patch between your fingers. Settlers repeated this task hundreds of times. Every storm cracked the dried mud, and every night they repaired it before sleep. A detail from early construction notes comes to mind. Many frontier families used clay because proper chinking materials were scarce, and cold arrived before walls were ideally finished. Clay worked well in steady temperatures but became brittle in harsh weather, evident in every cracked patch along the wall. You reach for a narrow stick with dried mud clinging to it. Settlers likely used it to push clay deeper into gaps, hurrying as storms raged outside. A memory from a travel journal drifts in. Some families believed adding ash strengthened the clay and kept winter spirits at bay. Smiling softly, you appreciate how deeply people wished for even a hint of protection during brutal nights. You move to the far wall, where a large crack runs from floor to halfway up the logs. The wind pushes snow through the gap, forming a small drift along the floor. You kneel and sweep it aside. The cold clings to your glove, melting slightly, chilling your fingertips through the thick fabric. Next to the crack sits a bowl of frozen mud. You tap it, and the clay rings like stone. If this storm had come before the ceiling was finished, the family would have struggled with mud barely soft enough to shape. You imagine their stiff, cold hands pressing frozen clay into walls before nightfall. You rise and look around. The furniture is sparse, pulled toward the center. Settlers often did this during winter storms. The walls were too cold to lean against. You picture someone moving a straw mattress a few inches closer to the fire pit each night, adjusting for new drafts. Historical studies come to mind. Scholars debate whether clay ceiling truly warmed cabins or served more as a symbolic act. Some claim it blocked enough wind to prevent frostbite. Others argue it only slowed drafts rather than stopping them. Standing here, feeling the cold swirling through the logs, you understand both perspectives. Your gaze shifts to the small fire pit at the room's center. It's unlit, only cold ash and blackened stones remain. Without proper windproofing, any flame would flicker wildly, sending smoke twisting unpredictably. You brush ash aside, tracing the circle of stones, feeling the soot darken your fingertips. You press your ear against the wall. The storm growls outside like distant thunder. Cold radiates through the logs, brushing your cheek, a reminder that winter always seeks a way in. You pull back and exhale. Along the back wall, a shelf holds dried grass and moss, gathered for more daubing. You pick up a handful. It crinkles, smelling faintly of earth and rain. You imagine someone kneeling, mixing it with clay as the storm rages, pressing it into cracks, smoothing it with a flat stone or bare palm. You replace the grass and shake the numbness from your fingers. The storm rattles the shutters, sending a thin line of snow drifting down. You hold your breath, picturing nights spent here with no fire, only fragile clay holding back the cold. You step into the center of the room. Every detail tells of the settlers' determination: clay pressed by cold hands, moss stuffed into cracks, grass braided to bind logs. This cabin is held together not just by wood, but by endurance. You imagine the family settling in for sleep, huddled in the center, listening to the wind probe for weaknesses. Someone might rise in the night to press more clay into a new draft, whispering reassurance to a frightened child that the wall will hold until morning. You move toward the door. The latch is cold against your glove. Opening it, the storm grabs at your coat, snow clinging to your boots. One last look at the cabin, a testament to resourcefulness. The walls patched night after night, surviving winter with little more than earth, grass, and perseverance. Turning toward the next distant shape, you step into the storm. Wind whips in icy ribbons across your coat, the night blurring into white swirls. Snow drifts sideways, sometimes upward, sometimes in tight circles, tilting the world. Your boots grow heavier with each step as snow packs beneath. Ahead, an unusual shelter appears, low to the ground, roof buried beneath a thick snow layer. Approaching, you see it's not a typical cabin. The walls curve inward, more mound than house. A small opening carved into the drift leads downward. You brush aside snow and find a narrow tunnel reinforced with branches. Lowering yourself inside, the cold bites briefly, then softens as the tunnel curves and opens into a hollow. The air is still, surprisingly calm. Cold, yes, but muted. The wind's roar is now a distant hum. You touch the snow wall, smooth, tightly packed, cold enough to sting. Yet it holds firm. Snow, properly shaped, traps air and insulates effectively. Settlers likely observed indigenous shelters and learned how snow caves stayed warmer than unfinished cabins. Walking farther in, the ceiling rises enough to stand. A low bench of snow lines one side, covered by straw and a hide forming a sleeping shelf. You run your fingers along the hide, stiff but not brittle. Imagine lying here, pressed against insulating walls, wrapped in furs. Memories from frontier correspondence come to mind. Travelers wrote of nights in makeshift snow shelters, amazed at the interior warmth compared to the open night. Kneeling beside the shelf, you feel the packed snow beneath the hide, firm but softened. Settlers likely spread blankets or extra clothing here, turning a frozen ledge into relative comfort. You imagine exhausted families crawling inside as daylight fades, desperate for refuge from the wind. A piece of oral winter lore surfaces. Some claimed snow caves carried a gentle heartbeat at night, made by gusts brushing outer walls. Children were told to listen for winter breathing. Pressing your ear to the wall, you almost believe it. The storm outside pulses rhythmically, the wind's pressure oddly calming. You step toward a small alcove carved into the far wall, ready to explore further. Inside the hollow sits a lantern, its glass cracked and frosted. You lift it carefully. The lantern is empty, yet soot still clings to its chimney. Someone had used it recently, perhaps to cast a gentle glow across the snow and brighten the hollow. You picture the dim amber light reflecting off the white walls, soft on the eyes, even if it offers little warmth. A question from historical discussions drifts into your mind. Some winter survival accounts claim snow caves were common emergency shelters, while others suggest settlers rarely use them unless absolutely necessary. Evidence is scattered. Diaries describe both desperation and resourcefulness. You consider this as you inhale the cool, steady cave air. It feels like a space shaped by necessity, not choice. You lower the lantern and step further inside, watching your breath curl upward in soft spirals before fading. Each footstep is muffled, giving your movements a floating quality. You sit on the snow shelf, letting silence wrap around you. It is peaceful in a suspended, almost eerie way. No creaking logs, no rattling shutters, no drafts at your ankles, only a distant hum of wind and the soft crunch of your weight shifting. You pull your coat closer and imagine settlers arranging bedding here. Perhaps they laid two hides over straw, huddling close as their breaths warmed the small cavity. Heat rises slowly in a space like this, enough to form faint frost crystals near the ceiling that drip as they melt. You look up and see tiny specks glistening in the dim light, frozen droplets from earlier warmth. You lift the hide and inhale. The faint scent of smoke mingles with the musky smell of the animal it came from. You picture someone dragging the hide into the cave, brushing off snow, and spreading it carefully. Cold fingers stiffen as they work quickly to prepare a sleeping space before darkness steals their remaining energy. A line from a trapper's journal surfaces. Sleeping in a snow cave felt like curling up inside a cloud. Cold, yet quiet, soft around the edges, a place where storms could rage but could not reach. Placing your hand against the wall, you understand. The outside world feels distant, almost unreal. You rise and move toward the tunnel entrance. The upward slope glows faintly with filtered light from above. You crouch and crawl through the narrow passage. Cold air rushes in as you near the exit. When you emerge, the wind grips you instantly, reminding you the cave's peace was temporary. Brushing snow from your coat, you feel the storm wrapping around you again. Behind you, the cave sits quietly beneath its snow drift, hidden, protective, waiting for the next weary traveler. You inhale sharply, then press onward toward the next faint shape ahead. Stepping back into the swirling white, the cold tightens around your shoulders like a rope. The wind pushes from the side, guiding your steps unevenly. You lean forward, breath rising in foggy wisps. Deep in the drifts, you notice a faint cluster of shadows. Not trees or rocks, something more structured. Squinting, you realize it's a small group of cabins, corners almost touching. Approaching the nearest one, you push the door open. Inside, the room is dim but warmer than expected. Several pallets line the floor, each covered in blankets and clothing, none belonging to just one family. You step further in and notice footprints in the snow-covered floorboards. Many boots have crossed this threshold recently. This is a community shelter, a place where neighbors gathered when storms made sleeping alone impossible. You imagine the scene a few hours earlier, people from nearby homesteads hurrying through the blizzard, clutching blankets and small bundles of food. Children carried on hips, faces wrapped tightly, adults knocking on the door not with hesitation, but relief. Frontier winters erased boundaries quickly. Rivalries softened, grudges faded. The cold made companions of everyone. Kneeling by the largest sleeping pallet, wide enough for at least 5, you press your hand against the blankets. The lingering warmth is unmistakable. Someone slept here recently, shoulder to shoulder with others. You picture adults lying at the edges while children slept safely in the middle, bodies arranged like spokes around a shared heat source. Settlement accounts note that families often sheltered together during severe winters, as body heat multiplied more effectively in groups than in isolated cabins. Entire neighborhoods sometimes rotated sleeping shifts on the warmest pallets. Standing here in the soft dimness, you feel the logic of this approach. The air still carries their shared warmth and faint echoes of overlapping conversations. Walking toward a corner, you notice a small wooden table with remnants of a communal meal, bits of dried bread, a half-empty clay pitcher, a bowl smeared with traces of stew. The room smells faintly of cooked meat, herbs, and smoke. You imagine settlers gathered in a circle, passing the bowl carefully so everyone had a taste before lying down together. Some settlements even used a call across the valley, whistle, knock, or lantern, to signal neighbors to gather during storms. You picture hearing that faint signal through the blizzard, guiding families to shared shelter like a fragile beacon. Across the room, a stack of quilts is folded near the wall, mismatched and clearly from different homes. Some are thick wool, others pieced from scraps, some lined with worn fur. Each quilt carries warmth from a household, now layered into one communal heap. Picking one up, you shake it gently. Pale dust drifts in the light. Draping it over your shoulders, warmth settles like a small embrace. You imagine lying beneath it with others, their breaths rising and falling beside you. Combined heat makes sleep possible in bitter cold. At the far pallet, footsteps circle around it. A few stones wrapped in cloth lie nearby, likely warmed earlier by a fire and passed between people through the night. You pick one up. It is cold now, but the cloth retains a faint memory of warmth, as if someone held it for comfort. A reflection from settlement studies comes to mind. Some researchers argue these group shelters arose naturally out of necessity, while others believe communities planned them as winter strategies. Historical evidence is scattered. Some journals describe spontaneous gatherings during storms, others reference designated emergency houses. Here, in the dim glow of the cabin, you sense that the truth lies somewhere in between. Winter demanded cooperation, and people responded. You move toward the window. Frost patterns cover the shutter. You trace one with a gloved finger, imagining children doing the same, while adults whisper quietly nearby. Perhaps someone told a story to calm the room, or maybe someone hummed a lullaby that drifted softly across the sleeping forms. You return to the center of the cabin and settle onto a wide pallet. The blankets rustle under your weight. You lie back for a moment, letting your eyes drift closed. The room grows quieter. The storm outside becomes a distant roar, softened by thick walls and the memory of shared warmth. You almost hear echoes of laughter, murmurs of conversation, and the slow breathing of many bodies resting together. It feels safe, fragile, and temporary. You sit up, letting the blankets slip from your shoulders. As you stand, the cabin seems smaller under a gust of wind. Snow presses against the outer wall with a faint hiss. You reach the door, rest your hand on the latch, and pause. You picture settlers waking in the morning, stretching stiff limbs, sharing the last scraps of food, and preparing to trudge back through snow to their own cabins. For one night, they survive together. You open the door. The storm greets you instantly, swirling around your boots and tugging at your coat. You glance back once more at the cozy, crowded room, then step into the icy world, walking toward the next shadowed shape. Ready to witness another fragment of winter survival, you let the cold sweep across your cheeks, reclaiming any warmth you gathered inside. Snow pushes against your boots, each step feeling like wading through icy water. You take a steady breath and press onward. The next cabin is smaller than the rest, with a crooked roof and a thin chimney that seems more decorative than functional. When you reach the door, it hangs slightly ajar. You slip inside, letting the wind die down behind you. Immediately, the atmosphere feels different. The room is scattered with small piles of fabric scraps, straw, and half-finished knots. Shapes line the floor, odd little nests built from whatever settlers could find. These are children's sleeping corners, improvised during long winter evenings by tiny hands and curious minds. You kneel beside the nearest nest. It is a small dome of straw, old scarves, and a faded quilt nearly torn in half. Inside, it forms a pocket just large enough for a child to curl into. You run your hand through the straw. It rustles softly, carrying the faint scent of dried grass mixed with something sweet, perhaps crushed berries used as dye. You imagine children laughing quietly as they gathered scraps to create these hideouts. While adults worried about drafts and storms, kids saw opportunity, weaving imagination into the harshness of winter. A detail from early settlement records rises in your thoughts. Many children built small winter nests inside the cabin, believing it kept them warmer. Some families encouraged it, others treated it as play that doubled as practical insulation. You trace the edges of the nest and picture a child curling inside, drawing blankets tight, pretending to be a fox in a winter burrow. You move to another nest near the wall. This one is made from wooden crates tipped on their sides, forming a tunnel. A layer of straw lines the bottom, topped with bits of old clothing stitched together. You crawl halfway inside. It feels warmer not because the temperature changed, but because the enclosed space trapped air around your body. You understand why children preferred these hidden spaces. They offered protection that wide open beds could not. As you sit in the nest, a memory from frontier anecdotes surfaces. Some children claimed arranging their nests in certain shapes brought good dreams: triangles for bravery, circles for comfort, narrow tunnels for adventure. Folklore blended with play, turning the cabin into a landscape of tiny shelters shaped by small hands. You smile, imagining a parent shaking their head fondly, yet allowing the child's creation to remain. You stand and examine the far corner. A larger nest sits against the wall, more deliberate in construction. Perhaps older siblings or adults helped build it. Branches form a small frame covered with hides and thick cloth. You lift a flap and peek inside. The space is surprisingly warm, the hide trapping heat while the walls block drafts better than open beds. You imagine several children crawling in, giggling quietly before sleep takes them. A thought from historical research enters your mind. Some scholars suggest these sleeping spots were common during harsh winters, while others think only families facing extreme conditions relied on them. Diaries reveal both. Some mothers wrote proudly about children building burrows, others never mentioned such practices. Looking around, you see why opinions differ. These nests sprang from creativity, not necessity alone, and families varied in their approach to bedtime warmth. You walk to a small stack of cloth scraps on the table. Pieces of worn shirts, torn dresses, and frayed socks lie in a pile. You rub them between your fingers. Thin, soft. Children likely use these to patch nests or add layers inside their burrows. You imagine tiny hands working carefully, determined to improve their shelters, just as adults patched cracks in cabin walls. You move to the window, frost curling outward like delicate white leaves. You wipe a small section clear. Outside, the storm still hurls snow across the land, erasing shapes as quickly as they appear. Inside, the nests feel like private worlds where children escape the wind, creating spaces they could control. Back in the center of the room, you lower yourself onto one of the larger nests. The walls hug your sides gently. You close your eyes. The storm outside becomes a soft rumble, muffled by cloth and straw. You imagine the quiet breathing of children drifting to sleep, their bodies warming the tiny space, their laughter replaced by murmurs as dreams take over. Another memory surfaces from a traveling schoolteacher. Winter brought out ingenuity in frontier children. With few toys and long nights, they turned survival into play, building nests, arranging blankets into caves, using warm stones as pretend lanterns to feel brave. You rest your hand on the hide above you, picturing these small rituals filling the room with comfort. You sit up and take a final look around. The cabin feels scattered but alive. Scraps of cloth, trails of straw, tiny structures, all tell stories of warmth shaped by imagination. Despite the bitter cold outside, these nests carry a quiet sense of joy, as if children met winter with resilience, wrapped in play. You rise, brush straw from your coat, and approach the door. Opening it, the wind rushes in, snatching loose strands of straw into the air. You step outside and close the door behind you. The storm embraces you again, white swirls, sharp and biting. You tuck your chin into your collar and press on through the drifts. Ahead, another shelter appears in the distance, each one telling its own story of survival in the frozen night. You push through the storm, your boots sinking deeply with each step, as though walking through wet cement. Your breath hangs in soft clouds, then vanishes into the wind. The cold has settled into your bones, a constant hum beneath your skin. Still, you continue. Far ahead, a small, narrow cabin leans slightly to one side, its roof thick with ice, its door coated in smooth frost. You reach the entrance and press your palm against the frozen wood. The frost cracks beneath your hand like thin glass. You push the door open and slide inside. The interior is dark. Only a thin sliver of gray daylight seeps through a warped gap in the wall. As your eyes adjust, you see a long pallet in the center, covered with blankets stiffened from cold. A faint glitter coats the bedding. You step closer and realize what you are seeing. A delicate crust of frost clings to every blanket, shimmering faintly in the dim light. You touch the surface, and crystals melt instantly under your fingertips. This was a common scene for settlers. They woke not just under blankets, but under a layer of frozen breath, their exhalations crystallized overnight. Sitting on the edge of the pallet, you feel the cold creep up through the straw beneath you. Memories from family letters written during harsh winters come to mind. People described waking with ice on eyelashes, blankets frozen stiff, hair crusted with frost. Some joked they felt like they slept in an icebox. Others quietly feared they might not wake at all if temperatures dropped further. In this silent room, that fear feels real. You lift a blanket and shake it gently. Frost flakes spiral to the floor like pale confetti. The blanket beneath is stiff at the edges, fibers frozen together. You imagine someone pulling it around themselves at night, hoping their breath might warm it. Instead, the cold dominated, freezing moisture before it could offer comfort. You run your hand along the straw below, cold and slightly damp. Straw insulates, yes, but also absorbs moisture, which freezes during nights like this. You imagine waking to cold seeping upward like a slow tide, chilling your spine before your eyes even open. A memory from an old settler's diary comes to mind, families shaking their blankets in the morning so vigorously that frost filled the room, glittering like a miniature snowstorm. Children found it enchanting, adults exhausting. You picture the scene now, frost sparkling as the family prepared to face the cold once more. You shift on the pallet and glance at the window. Frost curls along the shutter in delicate streaks, ice feathers branching like winter flowers. Beautiful patterns, yet proof of the cold's full invasion. A frozen window shows how little the air inside protected them. You pull the blanket across your lap. Its fabric cracks faintly. This is winter sleep before modern insulation, stoves, and airtight walls. Slumber under the storm, breath warming only a small circle around the face, frost claiming everything else. Historians often debate these frost-covered mornings. Some call them a standard feature of frontier life. Others argue they occurred mostly in poorly built shelters or during exceptional storms. Accounts vary, and sitting here with frost still clinging, you sense both interpretations may be correct. Rising slowly, you walk to the wall. A draft slips between two logs, brushing your cheek. Pressing your palm over the gap, cold passes through your glove immediately, a reminder of fragile shelters. Even well-built cabins struggled against plummeting temperatures. You imagine families waking hourly to push grass or cloth into cracks, desperate to buffer the frost forming inside. Turning back, you lower yourself onto the edge of the pallet again. You close your eyes, imagining dawn here, frost on the blanket, breath condensing into little puffs of ice that fall back onto your chest, soft cracks of frozen fabric, the scent of cold straw and last night's embers. The cold pushes into your bones, nudging you awake. Opening your eyes, you stand. Frost glitters faintly on the blankets, a quiet beauty hiding beneath hardship, a shimmering reminder of the winter battles fought each morning. You walk to the door, pulling it open. The storm greets you, icy air rushing in. Snow crunches beneath your boots. You continue toward the next distant shelter, your journey through this frozen world far from over, with more stories of settlers fighting for warmth. Pushing through another curtain of snow, the storm thickens, blurring your hands into the white haze. The cold hums against your ears like a warning. You press onward. Ahead, a narrow structure emerges alongside the trail. No fields, no stacked wood, no sign of permanent settlement, just a traveler's shelter for wanderers caught by winter. You brush snow from the doorway. The cabin is small, walls within arm's reach. The sharply pitched roof sheds snow rather than providing comfort. You step inside, shutting the door. The wind quiets to a distant murmur. The room is sparse. No bed frame, no crates, only a few scattered tools, a rolled cloth bundle, and a hollow log at the back, a forgotten relic of travel. You kneel beside the log. Its center has been hollowed deliberately, forming a smooth tunnel along its length. Your fingers trace the inside. The wood is polished, darkened by use, and faintly warm despite the cold air. River travelers and traders often used hollow logs as temporary winter shelters, finding protection from storms during long journeys. Inside, body heat built up quickly, turning the cramped space into an effective cocoon. You ease down and slide your hand deeper into the hollow. The wood feels thick and insulating. You imagine lying here during a storm, knees drawn to your chest, blankets around your shoulders, the log shielding you from the relentless wind. The tight space would be uncomfortable at first, but after hours in the cold, the enclosure could feel like a relief. A memory from early frontier travel guide surfaces. Traders praised hollow logs as vital winter shelters when far from settlements. They selected logs just large enough to fit inside and often sealed the ends with branches or hides to trap warmth. Some logs even absorbed the faint smoky scent of nearby campfires. Leaning closer, you detect that subtle aroma. You rise and turn toward another object near the far wall. An overturned sled rests there, runners chipped but solid. You crouch and lift its edge. Beneath, straw has been packed and lined with scraps of cloth. Travelers slept under overturned sleds, using them as makeshift roofs during harsh nights. You brush your glove across the straw and picture tucking yourself into the narrow space, sealing the edges with snow to block the wind. It is both desperate and clever. You imagine a traveler crawling under the sled as the storm rages overhead, snow drifting over the edges until the space becomes a quiet bubble warmed by body heat. It wasn't comfort, it was survival. Further inside the cabin, a simple wooden pole leans against the wall. Tied to its end is a thick bundle of cloth. You lift it gently. It is a traveling bedroll, designed to carry warmth and create it. Inside are furs, spare clothing and a thin quilt, all rolled tightly together. You unroll it halfway, forming a small nest on the floor. Pushing your hand into the center, you feel pockets of insulation. A wandering trapper's letters come to mind. He described nights inside tightly wrapped bedrolls, feeling like a parcel, unable to move yet protected from the cold. Outside the world faded, leaving only breath, heartbeat, and the muffled sound of falling snow. You sense that same reality pressing into your hand through the layered fabrics. You move to the hearth at the far wall. It is a shallow pit lined with stones, not a full fireplace. No fire burns now, but faint charm marks circle the edges. Travelers kept fires small to conserve fuel, as strong winds could make even a modest flame dangerous. Touching a stone, you notice its cold, smooth surface from years of handling. At your feet, a small iron pot rests. Lifting it, you see its blackened bottom and the remnants of something once warm, broth or melted snow for drinking. Travelers melted snow constantly, using warm liquids to stave off the cold from within. A thin layer of ice clings to the pot, glinting in the dim light. You recall how some travelers slept near half-burned coals in a pot to keep the air around their face slightly warmer. You kneel beside the pit, imagining the tiny warmth seeping upward through the night. Small tricks mattered when temperatures dropped. Turning to the wall where branches lean upright, you lift one. These were windbreaks, meant to be arranged into temporary shelters outdoors. Travelers carved branches into long ribs, stretching hides or blankets across them to form small tents. Snow resting on top further insulated the interior. You picture yourself inside, hearing snow settle softly above. In the quiet of winter, it could feel comforting, as if the world gently tucked you in while the storm passed. A thought from frontier research drifts through your mind. Scholars debate how often traders, scouts, and isolated settlers relied on these improvised shelters. Some argue they were rare, others that they were essential tools of seasonal travel. Accounts differ by region and memory. Here, in a cabin filled with scattered tools, you sense the practicality behind each object. They were not luxuries, they were lifelines. You return to the hollow log and sit beside it. Snow taps faintly on the roof, softened by ice layers. Closing your eyes, you picture a traveler arriving at dusk, exhausted. They brush snow from their coat, unpack their bedroll, and slip into the hollow log or under the sled. Silence settles around them, breath warming the space, and sleep comes slowly, like a heavy tide. Opening your eyes, the cold returns to your fingers. You roll the bedroll carefully back into place, touch the sled one last time, feeling its smooth runners, then lift the door latch. The storm rushes in, brushing snow across your boots and shoulders. You shut the door behind you and step into the wind. The world is white again, endless and shifting. Yet you move forward, guided by the faint shape of the next cabin, carrying the quiet resilience of travelers. Walking through the frozen night, you lean into the wind. Snow swirls around your legs in restless spirals, tugging at your balance. The storm feels heavier now, each flake carrying its own weight. You breathe slowly and press onward. Night stretches endlessly, sky and ground blending into a shifting blur. Through the thick white veil, a low cabin emerges, hunched beneath the storm like a weary traveler. You push open the door and step inside. Stillness hits you immediately. The air is cold, but the quiet feels different, heavier. You move further in and see a single sleeping platform at the center. Straw is flattened, blankets crumpled. The impression of a body is faintly visible. Exhaustion ruled here. You step closer and feel its presence. The first thing you notice is how heavy the air feels, exhaustion leaving a silent imprint. Kneeling near the bedding, you touch the blankets, sensing the lingering weight of rest. They are cool now, yet beneath them, the straw holds a trace of warmth, trapped earlier by a body too exhausted to move during the night. A memory from the frontier journal comes to mind. Settlers often describe the crushing fatigue of winter, chopping wood in freezing air, hauling heavy loads through snow, repairing cabin cracks, fetching water through ice. Each task drained energy faster than the cold allowed it to return. Some nights, people collapsed onto their bedding without even removing their boots. You stare at the platform, imagining that kind of exhaustion, the kind that steals words and thoughts, leaving only breath. You sit on the edge of the bed and let your shoulders relax. Your body echoes the weariness that once filled this room. The cold creeps through the straw, climbing your spine. Yet, instead of biting sharply, it feels oddly muted, softened beneath imagined fatigue. You close your eyes for a moment, letting yourself sink into the lingering heaviness. Opening your eyes, you turn your head. A coat hangs on a peg near the door. Its sleeves are stiff, dusted with frost, and the hem is coated in dried mud. You lift it and feel its weight, heavier than any modern coat. Thick wool layered over more wool, patched repeatedly at the seams. You picture someone shrugging into it each morning, muscles aching, breath fogging the collar, preparing for another grueling day. A fragment from old winter letters drifts into your thoughts. Settlers claimed the cold made their dreams heavier, as if sleep itself added weight. They wrote of waking with limbs filled with sand, bodies reluctant to rise even as daylight crept into the cabin. You picture someone lifting their head from this bedding, neck stiff, shoulders dull from strain. You rise and move to a narrow table against the wall. On it lie a few tools, worn from long use, a hammer with a missing head, a cracked wooden spoon, a small flintstone beside half-burned tinder. You run your fingers along the handle of a dull knife. The tools whisper stories of hands too weary to repair them properly after a long day, promising to mend them tomorrow, and tomorrow again. Stepping back, you notice small, hesitant footprints near the door. Perhaps someone woke repeatedly here, not from warmth or comfort, but because the cold stole sleep in brief slices. Fatigue becomes something else in winter. It does not just make you sleepy, it drags at your mind, dulls instincts, slows reactions. Settlers wrote often of how simple tasks became dangerous under such weariness, how chopping wood half asleep could lead to disaster, and how the cold magnified every mistake. You kneel beside the fire pit. It is empty except for a few blackened scraps. Touching one, it crumbles between your fingers. Whoever slept here last night had no fire to warm them. Perhaps they were too tired to gather wood before the storm. Perhaps the wood was wet. Perhaps they simply fell into bed, hoping the blankets alone would carry them through the night. Thoughts from winter hardship studies surface. Scholars argue that exhaustion was one of the greatest hidden threats of frontier life. Not starvation, predators, or even the cold itself, but fatigue that turned every simple decision into a gamble. Some claim it contributed more to winter deaths than frostbite, others say it only amplified existing dangers. The truth likely lies between. You sit on the straw again, letting your fingers sift through it. The fibers scratch your gloves. The faint scent of old grass rises from the bedding. You close your eyes, imagining lying here after a day battling the storm. The chill would feel distant compared to the weight in your muscles. Eyelids would close before your mind could form a thought. Even fear would fade beneath the pressure of exhaustion. You rise and move to the far wall. A thin crack in the logs lets in a faint draft. The cold brushes your cheek like a whisper. You imagine someone waking each hour to push cloth into that crack, falling back asleep before finishing. Fatigue makes even simple repairs monumental. You glance back at the bedding. The blankets lie tangled, twisted, never fully warm, never fully rested. You lift one corner. The fabric is stiff, moisture from breath has frozen there. You lower it gently, mindful of the silent story in its folds. Breathing slowly, you feel the weight of the room settle on your shoulders. This cabin holds countless winter nights of people pushing past limits because they had no choice. No rest until dawn, no pause from the cold, only the endless rhythm of breath and heartbeat in a world determined to drain both. You walk to the door and grip the latch. Pulling it open, the storm surges in, sharp and demanding. Stepping outside, you let the cold sweep over you. Behind, the cabin stands quiet, holding its testimony to what winter exhaustion feels like when warmth is scarce. You take a steadying breath and move toward the next shelter, rising faintly through the dense white. The storm still has more stories. Wind swirls around you, tugging your coat, pushing snow into your sleeves. The night feels louder now, full of small crackles and distant roars. You pause and listen. Beneath the constant howl, faint noises drift across the frozen world. Pops, whispers, low dragging groans. Each sound demands attention. You walk toward the next cabin, guided more by instinct than sight. Its silhouette emerges slowly through the white, trembling under the wind. At the door, you push it open and slip inside. The room is dim, but your ears adjust faster than your eyes. The storm becomes a dull hum. Inside, softer, subtler sounds emerge. Wood settling, a gentle creak from the rafters, blankets rustling in drafts. Not frightening, just the natural voice of a shelter holding itself together. Then another layer of sound appears. Breathing, soft, slow, uneven. You move closer and sit at the bed's edge. The air carries the scent of wool, cold straw, and human presence. You attune to the delicate rhythm. Long inhale, slow exhale, restless shift. In the frozen world of pioneer winters, listening for these sounds was a nightly ritual, essential for survival. Breath meant warmth, breath meant no one had succumbed to the cold. A memory from old winter journals drifts quietly into your mind. Families often recalled listening for one another at night, especially to check on children or the elderly. The room might be completely dark, yet the subtle rise and fall of breath offered reassurance during long, cold hours. Without it, someone could wake in panic, groping through the dark to gently rouse a loved one. You lean forward, ear close to the blankets. The sound is soft and steady, hovering between sleep and discomfort. The cold makes breathing shallow. You imagine settlers wrapped tightly, unable to move much for fear of losing heat, attuned to these familiar patterns in the darkness. Nearby, a sudden sharp crack comes from the wall. You turn slowly. It is not a threat, it is wood contracting under the cold. Placing your hand on the logs, you feel a faint tremor. This sound would have been ordinary on winter nights. Logs splitting, rafters shifting, trees snapping under ice. You picture a child waking, convinced the cabin is breaking apart, while a parent whispers reassurance. It is only the cold speaking. You sit back and listen. Outside, the storm changes tone, sending a long, drawn-out wail across the sky. It vibrates through the walls like distant wolves, or sometimes it truly was wolves. Travelers wrote of nights when wild cries blended with the wind, making it impossible to tell where howls ended and the storm began. You approach the window. Frost curls across the shutter like lace. Pressing your ear to the crack, you hear something beyond the wind. A deep groan as trees bend under the storm, a distant snap as one finally gives way. Such sounds could wake a family instantly, prompting a check of the roof, fearing a falling branch. Old oral histories offer an unusual detail. Some families believed winter night sounds carried warnings. A hollow whistle meant more snow, a deep crack signaled a break in the storm, rapid tapping suggested ice forming dangerously fast. Whether superstition or careful observation, these sounds became part of the settlers' winter vocabulary. You return to the sleeping platform, listening more closely. Sounds inside the cabin shift like gentle waves. A blanket rustles as a draft slips beneath. A bed frame groans as the cold tightens its joints. A sleeper exhales, bundled tightly. Together, these noises form a fragile symphony of survival. Scholar descriptions of winter living come to mind. Cold nights required constant vigilance. Even in sleep, families remained half-aware. A sudden silence could alarm them. A faint child's breath might awaken someone. Some researchers argue that these subtle sound checks saved lives. Others say they were simply habits born of fear. You let both ideas settle as you tune into the delicate rhythm beside you. Running your fingers across the blanket, you notice stiffness in places and softness in others. You imagine lying here, eyes closed, ears tuned to every creak, sigh, and whisper of wind. Sleep comes in fragments, drawn away whenever the storm changes voice. Nights like this demanded both warmth and awareness. You rise and approach a corner. A lantern rests on a crate, unlit, its metal clicking faintly as it contracts in the cold. Even simple objects speak at night. You tap it lightly, the echo fades softly. You imagine families using such tiny sounds to reassure themselves that nothing in the room has shifted under the storm's pressure. Turning back to the sleeping platform, you hear steady breathing, rising and falling like a fragile metronome. You listen until your own breath matches the rhythm. Then you rise quietly, careful not to disturb the peace. Opening the door, the storm rushes in, loud and chaotic. The contrast makes your heart skip, but you step forward, letting the wind swallow the calm behind you. Pulling your coat tight and lowering your head, you move toward the next cabin, carrying the memory of winter's hidden sounds and the fragile breaths that once filled the night. Snow swirls around your boots in restless spirals, sometimes climbing your legs. You steady yourself and press on, eyes fixed on the dark outline of another cabin. It leans slightly, built from old lumber and pieces that seem repurposed from something else entirely. Reaching the door, you note its mismatched frame, planks smooth and rough, a wagon sideboard forming the lower half. Pushing it open, you step inside. The air is cold but calmer than the raging wind. The room is filled with improvised furniture, crates stacked as a table, broken wagon spokes lining a wall, a long sleeping platform built from scavenged materials. Snow falls from your coat as you move. The platform sits a few feet off the ground, supported by crates, splintered boards, and iron rods likely taken from an old farm cart. Pressing your hand against the edge, it feels sturdy yet uneven. Bedding atop is a mix of quilts, fur scraps, worn coats, and a canvas stretched over twigs in one corner. You sit gently, the platform creaks but holds. Fingers trace a wagon plank support, worn smooth from years of travel. You imagine settlers hauling it in after a long journey, deeming it unfit for carrying supplies, but useful to carry them through the night. Early homestead journals recall similar practices. Sleeping platforms made from crates, barn doors, broken barrels, and dismantled wagons became essential beds during harsh winters. The ground was too cold to lie directly on during storms, so raising the bedding even a few inches helped keep the chill from seeping into the spine. You press your palm against the platform, appreciating the simple ingenuity of sleeping above the frozen floor. Leaning back slightly, you feel the uneven surface beneath your coat. The platform groans softly under your weight. Settlers likely slept shoulder to shoulder here, shifting to avoid the sharp edges of crates or the splintered boards. You imagine someone whispering in the dark, making room for a neighbor or family member settling beside them. A small, unusual memory from a traveler's account drifts into your mind. He wrote of a family who slept on a platform made from 2 broken cartwheels and a row of crates. When he asked how they managed, the father laughed and said, "Better crooked than frozen." The phrase echoes softly as you glance around the improvised sleeping space. You touch one of the blankets draped over the platform. The fabric is heavy, patched where seams have worn thin. Lifting it slightly, you see layers of materials that aren't bedding in the modern sense: thick canvas, folded burlap sacks, and a worn coat missing its buttons. These layers form patchwork insulation, each piece holding a bit of warmth. You run your hand along an iron rod supporting the bed. Cold enough to sting, yet its sturdiness must have been reassuring. Even so, it likely carried the faint smell of metal and earth into the bedding, a scent settlers would have come to accept as part of winter life. Shifting your weight, a crate beneath the platform rattles. Kneeling, you peek under the structure. Crates are stuffed with dried grass, extra cloth, and a folded strip of fur. These items serve two purposes: storage and added insulation, keeping the cold from seeping upward. You brush your glove across the grass. It crackles softly, faintly smelling of summer fields now buried beneath snow. A quiet reflection from frontier studies arises. Researchers note that improvised sleeping furniture demonstrates settlers' ingenuity in facing harsh winters. Some argue these platforms were common in storm-prone regions. Others claim only families with broken wagons or scarce materials built beds from scraps. Both ideas make sense. Sitting here, you let your back rest against the wall. The wood is cold, but a fur draped over it offers some protection. You imagine lying here with 2 or 3 others, bodies pressed close, conserving warmth. Outside, the storm presses against the logs, making the walls tremble. This platform of discarded items is a quiet declaration that settlers refuse to surrender to the cold. In the corner, a half-finished bed frame leans, made from wagon ribs and axe handles tied with strips of hide. Someone attempted a more sophisticated bed but ran out of materials or time before the storm hit. You touch the uneven surfaces, recognizing the stubborn effort to create comfort from whatever winter hadn't claimed yet. Returning to the main platform, you listen to the soft shifting beneath you, crates knocking, straw rustling under cloth, wind seeping through cracks. You imagine a family settling here at night, voices low, movements slow to conserve heat. A memory from an old journal surfaces. A woman wrote of building a bed from her husband's broken toolbox and a wagon door. It wobbled, but it held us through the coldest night, she noted. Practicality outweighed comfort. Standing, you take one last look at the patchwork platform. Uneven, mismatched, yet somehow sturdy enough to trust. You picture settlers climbing onto it after long days, grateful for anything lifting them off the ice-cold floor. Stepping outside, the wind immediately sweeps in, swirling snow across the room. You pull the door shut, feeling the storm wrap around you like a restless cloak. Ahead, a shadowed shape emerges through the white. You tuck your chin into your coat, draw a deep breath, and continue toward the next shelter, the next story winter has yet to reveal. The wind rushes up your sleeves and brushes icy fingers along your neck. The night feels endless, the horizon lost in a trembling curtain of snow. Your legs ache with every step, but you follow the faint outline ahead. Another cabin appears, smaller and leaning as if winter has pressed against it all season. Pushing the door open, a wave of cold greets you, but the air carries something else, the lingering warmth of food. Not fresh or elaborate, but the echo of stew, broth, or simmered animal fat from earlier in the day. You close the door, letting your eyes adjust. A small pot sits near the center of the room, balanced on stones. The fire is gone, but the pot radiates faint warmth. Kneeling, you hover your hand above the lid. A soft fragrance rises, meat, roots, perhaps a hint of herbs gathered before winter tightened its grip. Heat blooms gently in your chest. Frontier household diaries recall how families relied on heavy stews filled with fat and marrow during deep winter nights, not just for flavor, but to sustain warmth from within. The body burned these ingredients slowly, releasing heat long after the meal. Settlers often said a good stew warmed the ribs better than a failing fire ever could. You lift the pot slightly. Even empty, it holds warmth. Maybe minutes ago, someone scraped the last spoonful, curling beneath blankets afterward. You imagine wooden spoons clattering, steam rising, children warming their hands before passing bowls along. Following the scent, you see a row of simple wooden bowls stacked. A thin layer of fat coats one, glinting in the dim light. Food like this created an inner furnace. Animal fat burned slowly inside, releasing heat long into the night. In a world of failing fireplaces, warmth often came from within rather than the room. A small, unusual detail from frontier life drifts into your thoughts. Some families believed that taking a spoonful of cold tallow before bed could prevent nightmares, nourishing the body while the mind rested. You picture a parent handing a child a hardened chunk of fat. The child grimaces but swallows it anyway, comforted by the familiar ritual. You sit near the sleeping pallet, feeling the faint residual warmth in the air. You imagine someone lying here after a warm meal, the fullness in their stomach radiating through their limbs, muscles relaxing, hands easing, and even the cold around them feeling less harsh because the body carries heat earned from stew and broth. Your gaze shifts to a small wooden crate holding dried meat, root slices, and preserved fat wrapped in cloth. You lift one bundle and peel it open. Inside is a lump of thick, waxy fat, solid now but clearly valuable. Settlers used it as both food and fuel, melting it into broth or adding it to thin meals to stretch warmth through the night. Beside the crate sits a large wooden spoon, darkened by years of use. You picture someone earlier, standing over the pot, slowly stirring the stew to prevent sticking, tasting it with the tip of the spoon, then nodding as the warmth reached their tongue. Perhaps the last portion went to a child or an elder, or maybe it was shared equally, knowing that cold demanded fairness. A reflection from frontier nutrition studies enters your mind. Experts often highlight the importance of high-calorie foods during harsh winters. Yet opinions differ on how much these rich meals truly raised nighttime warmth. Some argue fatty foods significantly increased internal heat. Others suggest the psychological comfort of a warm meal mattered just as much. As you breathe in the lingering aroma, both explanations feel valid. You walk back to the fire pit and sit cross-legged. Though the flame is gone, the stones still hold pockets of warmth. Placing your palms on them, you feel the soft heat seep into your gloves. You imagine a family finishing dinner, sitting close to the pot, absorbing the warmth before slipping into their blankets. That glow from the meal would linger long after the fire died. A wooden ladle lies nearby. Its handle is smooth from countless hands. You lift it to your cheek, catching a faint scent of broth clinging to it. Gently, you set it back, a quiet witness to meals that sustained families through countless freezing nights. You stand and approach the sleeping platform. Pressing your hand to the blankets, they feel cold now, but you imagine them warmed earlier by bodies comforted by food that softened the sharpness of winter. Closing your eyes, you picture drifting to sleep with the memory of warm stew spreading through your chest. Opening your eyes, you take in the room once more. The pot, the scent of cooked herbs, the lingering comfort of food. Even without a fire, the meal left traces of warmth, a reminder that the cold could be fought from both outside and inside. You move to the door, lift the latch, and push it open. The storm hits your face instantly, sweeping the gentle food warmth away. Pulling your coat tighter, you step through the snow, crunching beneath your feet, moving toward the next shadowed cabin. Another fragment of winter's survival. You leave the smell of stew behind, stepping back into the storm, letting the cold slide against your skin like a sharp whisper urging you forward. Snowflakes sting your cheeks, and the wind tugs at your coat with impatient hands. You press on, breath rising in slow clouds, until another cabin appears, its edges blurred by the swirling white. The structure is slightly rounder than the last, with a small, uneven vent cut into the roof. Pushing through the drifts, you lift the latch. Inside, the air changes, not warmer, not safer, just denser. Smoke clings to the space like a thin fog. Even without a fire, you sense its memory lingering in the rafters. Your throat tingles from the mix of charred wood and cold air. You cough softly, pulling your scarf over your nose as you step further inside. At the cabin's center sits a shallow fire pit ringed with stones. Faint embers glow, remnants of a flame that tried to survive until the storm became too wild. Kneeling beside the pit, you touch a stone. It carries the tiniest warmth, the last breath of a fire defeated by the night. You look to the vent above. Frost clings to its edges. The opening is narrow, just large enough for smoke to escape in mild weather, but in storms like this, snow and ice often clogged it. Settlers knew the danger. Smoke could silently fill a cabin, turning a comfort into a threat. A memory from frontier notes surfaces. Families often avoided full fires during blizzards, not for lack of wood but due to fear of smoke inhalation. Poor ventilation required small, controlled flames. Embers and the steady heat of stones were safer, yet some nights demanded a larger fire, despite the risks. You lean closer to examine soot patterns, dark rings climbing the walls like ghostly fingerprints, a faint haze lingering near the ceiling. Straightening, you take a deeper breath. The air tastes like smoke hours after a fire, a reminder that warmth always carried danger. You imagine a family huddled here the previous night, voices quiet as they decided how much heat to dare. Perhaps a child pleaded for a bigger fire, while an elder warned against it. Hands carefully placed a single log in the pit, watching the flame grow hesitantly, hoping it wouldn't overwhelm the room. A faint knocking draws your attention. The shutter rattles against its frame. Shifting wind pulls the smoke sideways toward the opening. You walk to the window, pressing your hand along the edge. Cold air seeps through, but this same draft likely saved the family earlier. A narrow crack could act as a lifeline, pulling smoke outward when the vent failed. A small, unusual memory from a traveler's letter drifts in. He described families propping a spoon between the shutter and frame during storms, creating a tiny gap for smoke to escape without letting wind blast inside. You kneel, testing the frame, imagining a metal wedge maintaining the fragile balance between losing heat and preserving breath. Standing again, you move toward the sleeping area. The bedding is damp from smoke-laden air. Lifting a blanket, you notice the faint tang of soot lingering on the fabric. This is what winter sleep often looked like. Quilts carried the scent of smoke, clothes smelled perpetually of the fireplace, and hair held traces of ash, even when no fire burned nearby. You sit on the edge of the bedding, listening to the soft crackle of cooling embers in the quiet room. You imagine settlers lying here, half awake, alert to every sound. A flicker of the flame could signal danger. A sudden dimming meant cold. The line between the two was as thin as a single breath of smoke drifting the wrong way. In the quiet, thoughts from winter survival research surface. Specialists often note how delicate the balance between heat and ventilation was in early cabins. Some claim settlers mastered it through instinct and experience, while others suggest that accidents were far more frequent than surviving accounts show. Sitting here, with smoke still clinging to the rafters, you can sense how challenging that nightly negotiation must have been. You rise and approach the vent. A thin line of melted frost drips slowly downward, freezing halfway into a fragile bead. You touch it lightly. Even a small blockage could force smoke back into the room. You lower your hand and picture someone climbing onto a stool, poking at the vent with a stick in the middle of the night, desperate to keep air moving. Kneeling by the fire pit again, ash coats your gloves as you sift gently through it. A few sparks flare and fade. You imagine the last person awake here, blowing carefully on these embers, trying to keep enough heat alive to soften the dawn chill without filling the cabin with smoke. A single wrong breath might snuff the flame or send soot rolling across the floor. You stand and walk to the door. The air still tastes faintly bitter. Resting your hand on the latch, you look around once more. The room carries the story of countless nights when warmth and danger coexisted. Every flame was both comfort and risk, and sleep came only after hours of watchful waiting. Opening the door, wind rushes in, sweeping out a thin wave of lingering smoke. You step into the storm, letting the cold cleanse the taste of soot from your breath. Ahead, another faint shape appears through the swirling white. You lift your collar, lower your head, and move toward the next chapter of winter's long night. The memory of the last cabin fades as you step into the storm. Cold grips your ears and slips beneath your collar in thin, persistent threads. Snow drifts shift like restless animals around your boots. You pull your coat tighter, following a faint outline ahead. The next cabin emerges after several long minutes, its roof bowed, walls leaning as if the storm whispered doubts into the structure all night. You push the door open and step inside. The air is cold but still. No fire burns. No scent of food lingers. Darkness dominates. Shutters are drawn, cracks stuffed with fabric. Yet the silence feels heavy, almost charged, as if something unseen fills the space. You close the door and pause. It takes a moment for your eyes to adjust, but even before that, you feel it, the shift inside your mind. Exhaustion, isolation, the return of anxious whispers that long winter nights encouraged people to ignore. You breathe slowly, letting the room's weight settle on your shoulders. This cabin tells a different story, not of cold air or smoky danger, but of the inward storms winter often stirred in its inhabitants. Nights were long. Days were short. Darkness seemed endless. People survived physically, yet their minds sometimes wandered into fearful spaces, where the cold echoed inside as much as outside. You walk to a small stool in the corner and brush frost from its seat. A folded cloth rests on top, shaped by the imprint of someone's hands. You lift it, noticing faint marks along the edges, twisted from anxious moments. You picture a settler sitting here, wrapped in blankets, turning the cloth in their fingers to resist pacing through the night. Early frontier letters recall families admitting that the darkest part of winter was not the cold, but the thoughts it brought. Isolation carved strange patterns in the mind. Every cracking log sounded like a warning. Every gust of wind felt personal. Even strong spirits sometimes wavered. You kneel by the bed. Its bedding is thick, heavier than in other cabins, as if someone tried to shield themselves from thoughts rather than cold. You press your hand into the layers. The straw beneath is tightly packed, almost flattened. You imagine someone tossing and turning, unable to sleep despite exhaustion, their mind replaying fears shaped from shadows and silence. Sitting on the edge of the bed, you listen. The room is still, but the storm outside creates faint murmurs, soft taps, a low groan, a distant rumble of wind over frozen trees. These sounds take strange forms when the mind is weary. A shifting door might become footsteps. A snapping branch might feel like a warning. Settlers of this cabin likely fought these illusions every night. A fragment from oral winter recollections surfaces. Some families believed the mind generated storms of its own during winter, giving them names: night wandering, cabin shaking, the winter twist. Children whispered that the cold whispered back. Adults dismissed the tales in daylight but sometimes repeated them in low voices during long nights. You rise and approach the wall, tracing shallow marks etched into the wood. Perhaps someone drew lines absent-mindedly, trying to stay awake, keeping their thoughts moving in safe circles. You rub your fingers along them. They feel uneven, carved in moments of distraction or restlessness. Moving to the shuttered window, you pull a small piece of fabric away, and a sharp draft crawls across your cheek. You push it back and sit on a nearby crate. Darkness thickens around you. You imagine winter nights when the only light came from thin coals or moonlight reflecting on frost. In that dim glow, imagination thrived, sometimes comforting, sometimes frightening. Researchers of early frontier life debate how much winter hardship was physical versus psychological. Some argue mental strain shaped survival as much as cold air. Others believe settlers rarely succumbed to fear, having grown accustomed to harsh seasons. Both have merit. Sitting now, silence feels deep enough to test a steady heart. You walk to a small wooden chest at the bed's foot. Its lid creaks as you open it. Inside are personal items: a worn mitten, a carved wooden toy, a folded note sealed shut. You lift the note but do not open it. Its edges are frayed, and a faint smudge of soot marks one corner. Someone wrote this during a long night, hands trembling from cold or emotion. You place it back gently. Sitting on the bed, you imagine lying here during a night when the storm raged outside and your mind roared within. Thoughts spin in circles, fears whisper, and sleep comes in short bursts before jolting awake. Settlers recorded such nights in brief lines. Rest was elusive. Hearts were uneasy, and the storm clawed at the mind. This cabin holds those echoes quietly, like distant footprints. You take a slow breath and rise. Your hand touches the wall. The wood is cold, but steady. People survived winter not only by insulating cabins or layering clothes but by steadying their thoughts against the storm's constant voice. They focused on the morning light, chores waiting, or family breathing nearby. They clung to tiny thoughts of hope the same way they held warm stones or shared quilts. You walk toward the door and lift the latch. Cold rushes in, stealing the room's stillness. Snow swirls at your feet. You glance back at the quiet interior before stepping into the storm. The wind grips you, tugging at your coat. Ahead, another shelter awaits, its outline barely visible. You lean forward, breathing through the cold, continuing toward the next story waiting in the frozen dark. The storm intensifies, slicing sideways across the landscape, attempting to erase everything in its path. Snow shifts unpredictably, and the world narrows to a tunnel of white, breath, and sound. You brace yourself and push forward. Far ahead, a shape emerges. At first, it seems like another half-collapsed shelter, but as you approach, you see it stands more solidly than the others. Its roof is thick with snow but holds, walls slightly leaning inward, reinforced with layers of mud, straw, and patchwork repairs. This cabin has survived winter after winter, enduring them all. It feels like a final chapter waiting quietly through the storm. You push the door open and step inside. The room is dim but not dark. A faint glow filters through a small round window. The air is cold but calmer. Outside, the storm rages, but inside, it feels distant, muted by thick walls and deep snow piled high. You pause and listen. This cabin does not creak with despair like others. It hums softly, a testament to steadiness through countless nights just like this one. Walking to the center, you notice a thick sleeping pallet layered with quilts, hides, woven mats, and a repaired feather mattress softened with age. Kneeling, your hand presses gently into it. The bed carries traces of families who prepared carefully each winter, improving bedding until it offered near comfort. Nearby, patching materials sit neatly, bundles of dried grass, cloth strips, small wooden tools for weaving and repair. Settlers here spent countless nights fixing winter gear, refusing to surrender to drafts or broken seams. Each small improvement added safety to the nights. You rise and approach the window. Frost spirals across the edges in soft white feathers. Brushing a small circle clear, you glimpse the storm beyond. Outside, the world remains wild and angry. Inside, the air feels steady. You imagine the settlers who once slept here, reaching this final stretch of winter with tired hope. The worst night survived, cold slowly loosening its grip. A memory from frontier journals comes to mind. Families described late winter as the long thaw. Not because warmth arrived quickly, but because something shifted within them. Fear faded. Cabins felt sturdier. Routines regained meaning. Even amidst fierce cold, people felt lighter, more confident that spring would eventually return. Turning back to the room, you notice a small clay bowl filled with grease for waterproofing boots and seams. A candle stub rests beside it, melted unevenly. These small items hint at preparation for the end of winter. Repairs made in anticipation of travel, tools cleaned for the coming season. Quiet confidence begins to replace early storm dread. A subtle detail rises from memory. Some families treated the final winter storm as a quiet celebration. Not loud joy, but a shared breath of relief. Outlasting the last icy fury meant earning the right to welcome spring with gratitude. That sentiment lingers here, woven into the walls, settled into bedding, captured in the scent of carefully stored dried herbs. You sit on the sleeping pallet. Layers cushion your weight. Lying back, your body sinks into warmth retained in cloth and hides. The storm roars outside but feels like background noise, as if the cabin itself has taught you to listen without fear. A reflection drifts through your mind. The greatest triumph of frontier families was not just physical endurance but creating calm spaces amid storms. Others argue resilience came from community, resourcefulness, and learned intuition. Both are true. Survival was a tapestry of small strengths, woven night after night. Sitting up, you brush frost from your coat and take in the cabin with quiet reverence. This place marks the final stretch of winter, when cold remains but no longer commands total fear. People could rest more deeply, trusting walls, bedding, and the slow return of sunlight. You walk to the door, hand on the latch. For a moment, you listen to the muted storm, pressing gently against the cabin as if testing its resolve. Then you open the door and step outside. The wind greets you, but softer now. Perhaps the storm is thinning. Perhaps your mind has steadied. The journey has revealed the quiet truth. Winter, no matter how harsh, eventually loosens its grip. Snow swirls past in silver ribbons. You take a last breath of icy air. This is the final stretch, the long thaw, where survival begins transforming into resilience. You close your eyes, letting the world soften. The storm hums far away, no longer urgent but rhythmic, like a lullaby shaped by winter itself. You stand at the edge of the long season, feeling cold's weight slip gently from your mind, leaving steady calm. The cabins visited settle into memory, straw beds, warming stones, shared blankets, whispered breaths in the dark. Each shelter becomes a soft lantern, glowing with quiet resilience. Let these images drift like falling snow, easy as a warm exhale against frost. Breath deepens, body softens. The snow eases, the sky clears for the faint blush of light on the horizon, a gentle, hopeful glow of early morning. You imagine stepping from the last cabin with no rush, only certainty that you have passed the coldest part of the night. The storm quiets, wind settles, the world grows still. You breathe slowly, deeply, warmly. Let the snow fade. Let the cold soften. Let the long night drift into the quiet space where sleep waits patiently.